Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29.
could you confirm, Declan?
Okay, so good morning members to Fáilte Rómha Lig. We have a quorum and I now call the meeting of the Committee for Communities to order, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this morning's meeting. Castlereagh, we have Sean and Morris on Zoom, and they can both see and hear us okay. So can I remind everyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I also remind members about the protocols relating to the use of electronic devices? Please switch all your devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and please be aware of the cameras and the sensitivity of the microphones as we proceed through the meetings. Finally, I would remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in the items under discussion today. So do any members have any issues they wish to declare an interest? I will declare that I own a residential property from which a rental income is received. Any other interested members wish to? No, thank you. Okay, members, moving on to Agenda 1, apologies. So, Clerk, do we have any apologies today?
Yes, we have Daniel McCrossan and Andy Allen.
Thank you.
Chair, just understand Andy's way taking part in the Invictus.
I'm aware of it as well. I'll come to you in a minute.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, that's yeah. So I will come to you. So there's a few items that I want to touch upon as part of Chair's business in item 2. Firstly, I want to thank Ciara Ferguson, Deputy Chair of the Committee, for all her support and interest in the Committee over the last year, and wish her all the very best in her new Committee. Ciara was a significant expert in relation to housing and community matters, I have to say, and added greatly to the work of the Committee, and I'm sure will bring all of that experience, knowledge and talent to her new role, and I guess we would all wish her well in that. And I also want to welcome Nicola Brogan then as Deputy Chair to the Committee. And I'm sure you'll find, Nicola, this remit both interesting and diverse, and we know your interest in community and voluntary sector as well. So very much welcome to this committee, and you will find that I suspect that Clerk and all the team are very, very helpful and will give you any support in that you need, although I know you'll be hitting the ground from experience. So thank you for that. And next then, I would like to give a big shout out to our committee colleague Andy Allen, who is travelling at the minute, right as we speak, I think, to meet to Vancouver as part of Team UK to compete in the Invictus Games. Andy is, I think we'll all agree, a multi-talented colleague, and he's going to be competing in the Nordic skiing, the indoor rowing and the wheelchair rugby. And Andy, we want to wish you all the best in those games. And Morris, you had mentioned that also.
Or Brian.
Sorry, Brian.
You're okay.
Apologies.
You're okay. No, well, you've covered it well, Chair, and indeed I wanted just that we should record our best wishes to Andy for a enjoyable and successful games, and we look forward to hearing how he gets on. So,
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, thank you, members. Moving on, members, more serious matters, and in particular this committee's scrutiny role. So I want to raise the issue of the recent £710 investment in a school pitch in the northwest. It is still not clear, and there have been media articles linking communities to this issue, and it's not clear how much, if any, funding has come from communities' budget. While the Minister of Education spoke to this in the Chamber earlier in the week, I didn't get a direct answer in relation to my question. We do have a scrutiny role to play in relation to the Department for Communities budget, should that be impacted. So I would be proposing that we seek clarity from the Department in the first instance in relation to that, to see if there's any element of funding from DFC. Any other thoughts, members, or comments?
Yeah, Chair, I'd just like to second that there proposal. I think it would be important for the committee to write to the Minister just to see exactly what input there was, and if there's any kind of future asks of the Department in regards to that there.
Yeah, members content? Thank you. Okay, members, also I just want to acknowledge then how helpful the session last week with the Permanent Secretary was, and a number of deputies that he had from DFC. I felt it was a constructive conversation, and it was a useful opportunity to make clear the expectations of the committee and to understand better the priorities for them and to hear about the constraints within which they are working. And Lastly then, for Chair's business members, just want to flag, you will be aware that we are due to meet the Minister again at our meeting on the 27th of February. To ensure that members get the most out of that, I would like to, if members wish, to raise in advance any issues they're particularly interested in. We have an opportunity, we can flag that, so questions and responses can be available and information available. So I'd just like to check if any particular issues members would like to add to topics of discussion, and also to say that members can pick up on email throughout the week if anything comes up. But are there any issues there, members, or any issues members want to raise?
Or by email,
Yeah.
The only one coming to mind is just the discussion last week on future gambling legislation, but what can be done in the short term. There was a number of matters that we raised last week with the Permanent Secretary to see what progress is being made in advance of the more major legislation.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Melissa?
And I still think that we need clarity on how it is that the Minister's progressing in relation to Castlereagh Park, given some of the newspaper reports that when having met with the Lutheran with GAA, that it was 2 months later before he actually addressed that issue then to central government and so on as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And Kelly, can I just check, was there an issue you wanted to raise in relation to universal credit of a slightly different?
It is slightly different, Chair, but it was just the help for health costs. Consultation is out with the Department of Health, and it's about passporting people who are on universal credit to allow them to access free sight tests, hearing tests, and help with hospital. But one of the things that there's a query over is the role of communities within that is not clear at all in the consultation, and I thought it might be worthwhile asking the department what work will be involved for them to provide the evidence of eligibility for the scheme to the Department of Health, and if cross-departmental costings have been agreed for that, because Health can certainly welcome the passporting. There's 2 options there, but is the Department for Communities being reimbursed by Health for the work? Because it looks like option 2 is quite substantial work for communities.
Yeah, and I know it has been an issue that's been raised with me in the past, that around the sight tests and things like that. There's a significant, I think, risk of a barrier being placed there to people who very badly need it, and who the entire system, not only the individual, but the system would benefit from picking those issues up earlier. And sight tests are fundamental to that. So I think there is an issue there. So you're asking that we write, Kelly, to
the department just to check to see, are they aware of how much additional work they will have, and if they have got agreement on payments for that work.
Yeah, Clerk, you can tell.
Members agreed, yeah.
Yep. Okay, members, thank you. So moving on then to the draft minutes, members, agenda item 3, and the draft minutes are contained there at page 7 of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of 30th of January as drafted?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Matters arising then, members, you've been provided with a summary table there at page 16 of your pack. There are only 2 responses for consideration today, members, so I'd just like to ask if you have any comments on either of the replies at 4.2 or 4.3. Go ahead, Kelly.
4.2, it does say there in the final paragraph of the summary that the portal went live on the 31st of January. Obviously, the papers were provided for that in advance of our documents going out. It was just if we could get an update from the department just on how the application process is going. Yeah. But the other confusion I have is that application in advance of the budget, so there's no guarantee that those might be awarded anything, because the Minister doesn't have the budget yet.
Yeah. So Clerk, you have the detail of what Kelly's request is there? Are you content with the detail, and Jack, is members content?
Content that we want to seek an update on how the application process is going since it opened on the 31st of January, and also clarification in and around budget, given that it has not yet been confirmed. Is that it?
Yeah. Are members content with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. Any other issues in 4.2 or 4.3? Members content otherwise with the matters raised. Thank you. Moving to agenda item 5 then, correspondence, which is at page 28, and there is a table correspondence memo members at page 3. of your table papers. I intend to go through these items by number and in groups as previously, and ask if you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So we will start off there from 5.2 to 5.3. Within those blocks, are there any issues that members wish to raise? So on 5.4 there, all party group, members decided they wish to receive a briefing. I think we should maybe ask for a written briefing on that, if there's any update, a written briefing at this point in time. Members content with that? Yeah.
Chair, could I ask that we include in that that all party group has been holding, and we've spoke to NICFA about this, they've been holding meetings that clash directly with this committee. It's just to remind them again, it would be helpful if they didn't exclude committee members, because there's no point in holding meetings if none of us can get there and we're the representatives.
Yeah, members content with that approach?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. No further items in 5.2, 5.5. I will move on then to just to say in 5.3 there's that pivotal report and the poverty map, and it's a stark reminder, I think, of the need for a strategy. The map is very stark in terms of it almost appears that the more marginal you are, the more likely in terms of geography, and I think that's significant for rural areas and something that does need to be considered as part of that overall work. So moving on then to items 5. So go ahead, Brian.
I think you're going to move on from 5.5. Again, it's their question whether we want to receive a briefing on the Northern Ireland Football Fund.
Yeah.
We haven't been given a written briefing at this stage, or is that no? So
there is an update in the correspondence of sorts, but they are offering a briefing should members want that. Yeah.
I actually think maybe that we should take a briefing on that. There is an element within that refers to some of the funding that relates to clubs and councils going up from 5 to 40%. I'm not clear what that impact of that would be. I'm very acutely aware of the pressure that there are on some of our councils in terms of money, especially councils like Mid-Ulster and Fermanagh South Tyrone with a lower rates base. So I'd be keen to know what the impact of that might be or how that's going to work. So I think it would be useful to take the briefing if members are content. I also see Morris with a hand raised that might be on this issue. Go ahead, Morris.
No, Chair, I think it will be very beneficial to us all to have a briefing on it, that's all, and I'm agreeing with the course that the committee are taking at the minute. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Morris. Kelly?
If we're getting a briefing on that, can we ask for a briefing on an update on what the plans are going forward for the replacement of 3G pitches or 4G pitches? Because with climate change, it's talking about when they're being replaced, they'd be replaced with environmentally friendly options. And I know Sport NI have a report out on that, but it's the capital money that's going to be needed to be discussed. If we can ask them if they could give us an update on that as well.
Yep.
Just in terms of a briefing paper, I mean, we've a letter from the DALO, but I don't see any paper on it. So
There's no paper. There's just some information.
Yeah, aye. But I suppose we'll get that at the time then if we're requesting the oral briefing. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, members. So I'll move on then to items 5.6 to 5.8 that members want to draw out. Just to state that in 5.6 there, to flag the members, there's an event highlighted there, legislative theatre event on domestic abuse and homelessness prevention. So if members wish to attend, please RSVP directly, and members but I want to just flag the item. Members content, any other items within that block? Kelly, go ahead.
No, Shan's hand.
Shan, go ahead, please.
Excuse me.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Yeah, it's just the 5.7, the work incentives report. I just think there's some really worrying statistics and figures in there, really around the just the deduction rate and things like that. And I'm just wondering if it would be possible to get a briefing on that. I think there's a lot of work that could be being done between the department and DWP about adjustments to taper rates and work allowances and things like that. And it'd be really useful. And maybe that's something that we could feed into Paddy Rooney at another session, like the one we had around universal credit. But I guess it would just be really really useful to get a wee bit more information on that. Just possible.
Members content?
From
Okay.
the authors of that report, or do we mean the department?
I think the department, for me, there's questions there within the department about what the role of the Department for Communities can be within I suppose, the work incentives. I know this is obviously coming from the economy side of the Assembly, but for me anyway, looking through that report, there's definitely things that the Department for Communities could be doing, and maybe they are doing, but it would be good to get a bit more of a steer um on some of that information, particularly around the margin the marginal deductions, if possible.
Members content? And then, Kelly?
I was just going to add to that, there's a worrying consultation on the go at the moment out of the Department for Communities about the cessation, so the ending of the Employment Support Scheme, which is the scheme that enables people with disabilities into work. Now, I know that the scheme was closed to new applicants, was it 2006 or something like that, but there still are existing a few hundred people who are in employment because of that scheme. Work incentives, it doesn't give a lot of incentive if they're closing the support scheme for that. I would just be concerned. It's just a flag to say that is a concerning. It's closure based on budget, but the Minister hasn't got his budget yet, so I don't know why something's being closed in advance. It seems like the deal's done, if you know what I mean. I'm concerned that those people with disabilities, what incentive is them and their employer for them to continue the roles that they have if the support mechanism is removed? So I don't know whether on the back of that we ask the department to clarify. I know that the consultation's ongoing, so they may well say they're not touching it until the consultation's finished, but it's how does that incentivise people with disabilities for work, or who are in work, and their employers to continue on if the money, the backend's being taken away from them?
Yeah, and it almost, like, so, and the Minister has on several occasions referenced the support to work as something very important within the anti-poverty strategy, so it does slightly. So
Committee has asked for a briefing when the consultation closes.
Okay.
We got some additional information previously and went back and asked for that.
Okay.
We can mention that in the letter that's going about the incentives, if that's fine.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, members content with that, and then I'll come to Melissa. Yeah, members content. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, just if I could get a wee bit of clarity in this, in terms of even the work incentive report and so on, is this not again to legislation that's been imposed on us, that where really we don't have any great input to it, and as much as that it's Westminster in terms of how it is they're going to sort of deploy the whole tax system and the likes, because we don't have any control over tax at the present time, and how it is that impacts on people entering the labour market as such.
Yeah, and that is a difficult situation, and I suppose then you're into the situation of how can you, and some of these are small enough numbers of people in ways, but how do you mitigate, or how do you deal with the impact and the fallout of all of that?
Can add that in terms of when we're seeking the briefing. Are there any ways in which influence can be brought to bear from here?
Effectively, because other than that, they're telling us more or less, suck it up. This is how it is, and you have to get on with it.
Yeah. Okay, members, so then moving on to, if there's nothing else within 5.6 to 5.8, members content with those, we will move on to tabled paper memo, which is at page 3 there of your table pack. So can I ask if there are any issues within that members wish to flag up? Just to flag on 5.11 there, the outturn and forecast. Outturn October-December, officials will be attending the committee on 27th February for January monitoring round briefing, so there will be an opportunity to discuss that there. Is there anything else from 5.10 to 5.15? Members are content to note as per the correspondence memo. Okay, thank you, members. So moving on then, members, we have 4 SL1 proposals in front of us today. Agenda item 6 is SL1, the emergency fuel payment regulations. There's a cover memo at page 100 there of your pack, setting out the committee's previous consideration of this proposal and this updated information. The scheme will now be known as the Pension Age Fuel Support Payment Scheme in terms of the minor policy changes, and the planned one-off £100 payment to pensioner households will be shared. So this means that a payment of £50 will be made to each claimant where there are 2 eligible claimants in a household, so the household payment will be £100. Furthermore, if there are more than 2 eligible claimants in the same household, they will each receive a £50 payment. In relation to claimants in residential care, they will now receive a payment of £50 as if they were 1 in residential care throughout the qualifying week, which was Monday the 16th September to Sunday 22nd September, and 2 in residential care for a period of 12 weeks immediately before the qualifying week, and 3 not in receipt of a means tested benefit. So officials will be available to brief on this proposal at the meeting on the 20th of February. But I'm flagging this now for members. If I have any queries on the SL1 they want to send to the department in advance of the briefing session, or so just take that first and then move on to the second part. Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just with regards to page 110, where it talks about the SL1, the emergency fuel payments. That £50 for the pensioners who are in residential care. The background and purpose: the proposed rule would provide for a one-off £100 payment to pensioner households. It's just to clarify if in the SL1 there will be a specific, because there could only be, you might have residential care where it's not £100, it's 50 times how many people, or there could be one person that qualifies. It's just to make sure that intention is included in the SL1, that it'll be different from £100. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Can I ask you to repeat that? Sorry.
So it's,
What is the question?
so the proposed in the proposed statutory rule that we've received on page 110, the background and purpose talks that the proposed rule would provide for a one-off £100 payment to pensioner households, which, as the chair has said, if there's 2 pensioners that's £50 each. But with regards to the £50 to people in residential care, that's not a household, if you know what I mean. So it's just to make sure that when they're doing the SL1 there's a very clear understanding of what, if that's included, the £50 for older people who are eligible in residential care. Because at the minute that reads like it's only a £100 payment to pensioners' households will be provided for in the SL1. The £50 for residential care is different.
yeah,
Here's
I
my
thought
sorry.
there was, yeah. My understanding was the residential care element was included in there, but I'll ask for clarification.
It's just
for
to
it.
make sure, because it just in the background and purposes, it only talks about the households and the £100.
Right.
You could have residential care where there's maybe 2,000 going into that household unit, if you know what I mean.
Okay. So it's about the treatment of the residential
Yeah.
care setting.
Just to make sure it's all
Okay.
clear in that, yeah.
Yeah, and it raises a question for me in that, in terms of, so this we're going to the individuals, and I'm wondering, is there any potential for tension there with the residential home who are providing the heating? So I think some clarity on that issue. I'm not clear from what we know at this point, so I think some clarity on that. There's potential for misunderstanding or...
Yeah, I've assumed that it will go to the individual person that's eligible, and then you may find that residential homes would be expecting that payment to be paid on per additional heating costs.
Yeah, but there's no actual statutory basis on which they could, like, those are very clearly defined contracts from the health board, and additional payments have to be very carefully monitored and scrutinised. So I think there is an issue that needs to be considered there.
Hello.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I've Morris first.
Yes.
Just sorry, go ahead, Morris.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I was just wondering how vulnerable people can be included somehow. They may not be of pension age, but they still have got issues. They need heat, etc., and being in a vulnerable position. I think they've been excluded. It's just something maybe we could tease out, please.
So, are you proposing that we write to the department and ask them what consideration they're given for people who fall outside this scheme but who are vulnerable in terms of heating poverty?
Yeah.
Is that your proposal?
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
Members agreed? Do we do that?
Yep.
Yeah. Brian?
Although I know that it's the pension age fuel support payment. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy just in terms of what Kelly was saying. I mean, the claimant will be the individual, and the payment will be made to them. So I don't think there's any suggestion that payments would be going to residential homes, but your concern is that they would somehow try to be making a case.
No.
For me, I think it was
will
me
go to the individual, though.
I think it was me that really raised that. Yeah,
Yes.
that the residential home would be saying, well, we're the people who are providing, so we need that. That's to cover the heating, and that could set up potential ill feeling or worse. And I just think that's a tricky enough element of it that, when it hits the ground in a residential home, the payments are going to be going in, and you could have a case where homes feel they should be getting the benefit of that. That's not in the contract. There's all sorts of.
Okay.
So I think it does need to be
Raise it maybe with the minister.
Flagged.
Certainly in the.
Pardon?
I mean, we can send it in advance, but we could also get clarification when the minister's attending the 27th, because I think the payments, it'll be March before they're going out. you know.
And I just to emphasise, this is the communities in terms of our role to assist and advise and support the department. It's identifying issues like that at this stage is where it can then be worked into the regulation.
Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify, Brian, just to say that I just wanted to make sure on the background and purpose that we've been provided from the department. It talks about the £100 payment to pensioner households, but the residential is different. It's just to make sure that the SL1 covers the intentions of what the department wants to do with residential care home residents. Yeah.
Okay, Clark, are you content with the detail of that? So then, are members content, based considering those points that have been raised, that the department proceed to make the rule? Yeah. Thank you. Agenda item 7 then is SL1, the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order NI 2025. So members, the proposed rule specifies the Pension Protection Fund levy ceiling for the financial year beginning on the 1st of April 2025. Whenever the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions makes a levy ceiling order under the Pensions Act 2004, the Department is empowered to make a corresponding order and has no power to set different amounts here. So do members have any comments in that, or are content for the Department to make that rule? Yep. Thank you. Agenda item 8, SL1. This is the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order NI 2025. So the proposed rule specifies the percentage by which the guaranteed minimum pension element of an individual's occupational pension entitlement. So a person could accrue a guaranteed minimum pension in a contracted out occupational pension scheme between 1978 and 1997 to ensure that is increased with effect from the 6th of April 2025. Members have any comment or content for the department to make that rule?
Content.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 9, SL1, Social Security Revaluation of Earnings Factors Order NI 2025. So again, this is a proposed rule that provides that earnings factors relating to national insurance contributions for historic tax years used in the calculation of additional state pension and guaranteed minimum pensions maintain their value in line with the increase in average earnings. Are members content the department make that rule? Thank you, members. So, members, we're moving on then to agenda item 10, which is the departmental briefing on the sign language bill.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come in? Sorry, I meant to say in that last one there.
Yes.
If you look at that percentage increase, it's a heck of a lot lower than previous years. There's a table they've provided with the comparison for previous years. Can we get a confirmation from the department just why that is? Because it's on page 132, the very last figure. For instance, the year before it was 12.4 and it goes down to 4.5. When you do a comparison for the other years, it's like, what? So it's just, can we get a clarification? Now, it may well be something, this is done by Westminster, we don't have any change order, but why is it so low now?
Yeah. So a rationale for the differential in this year, the proposed rate?
Yeah.
Okay.
It may be a very simple one, but it's just to get that understanding. Sorry, apologies for coming in late.
No, thank you, Kelly, it's important. So, members content that we seek that, and members content for the department to make the rule, taking into account that issue that's been raised. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, members, thank you for that. So we are now moving into agenda item 10, departmental briefing on the sign language bill. So members, an in confidence copy of the bill is at page 135. And I'd now like to welcome the following officials to our meeting this morning. So I have Ian Greenway, who's Director of Culture, we have Tommy McCauley, who is Acting Head of Sign Language Policy and Legislation, Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch, and Gerard Flynn, who is Policy and Legislation Officer in the Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch. So, Ian, before I invite you to make a brief opening statement, I want to let you and your team know that the committee appreciates your preparation and your time here today. We believe we will be seeing a lot of each other over the next period of time, and I think it's important to say at the outset that not all of the members of this committee were members of the last committee, when you may have set out a lot of background and preparations up until this point. So I think in that sense, it won't always be taken as read. You know, there will be queries and things that the members themselves of this committee will wish to satisfy and update themselves and be familiar with. So we are very keen to get as much background information as possible today, and then once the bill is referred to the committee for scrutiny, we will plan the committee stage and how the call for views should be managed and how stakeholders can be properly and fully involved. And I just want to flag the point that this is a particular piece of legislation that is going to impact people with particular challenges in relation to information. We have facilitated a session previously to set the process out to that sector, but we're very clear that as we move through this bill, we will have to be very cognizant of those additional barriers and challenges and speak to that sector of the population in a way that meets their needs. And I think we're all probably, I'm sure, of one mind that that's a challenge we're all up for. And I know that we will be doing that to the best of our ability. The purpose of today is to get as much possible information to enable all MLAs, not just members of this committee indeed, to play an active part in the second stage debate on the principle of the bill, which I note is now scheduled for Tuesday 18th of February. So that's coming up quite imminently. So can I ask you then, Ian, I think it's yourself, can I ask you to provide your overview and then we'll move on to questions from members? Brian, go ahead.
Chair, sorry to interrupt. Just on a technical matter, because I noticed, yes, the bill's second stage is on Tuesday the 18th in the order paper. So has the first stage, has the bill been introduced, or is that to happen this week? It's not in the order paper currently, so maybe we could chase that up.
Next week.
Double check that.
Stages, and I think.
No, but when I looked at it,
Double check
it wasn't in the order. Wasn't on the order paper. I know it's only a couple of minutes, whatever, to introduce it. But
yeah.
Anyway, it's just
fair point, Brian. Appreciate that. So listen, I'll go back to yourselves, and if you want to go ahead and give us that briefing, then we'll get the members' questions. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to brief you on the Sign Language Bill this morning. By way of background, the Department for Communities had Executive Department Policy Lead for British Sign Language and for Irish Sign Language. The functions fall under our Cultural and Linguistic Policy remit and are the responsibility of the Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch within the Department's Culture Division, which in turn forms part of Engaged Communities Group. Over the past number of years, branch officials have engaged with the deaf community and executive departments throughout the policy development stage of the bill. Tommy and Gerard and their colleague Patricia Leaper have been responsible for engagement with the Office of Legislative Counsel for the drafting of the clauses of the bill. And as you mentioned, Chair, we've provided you with detailed written briefing and an in-confidence copy of the bill ahead of its introduction, which we will follow up Mr. Kingston's comment and just make sure that we haven't blinked and missed it for next Monday, which is our understanding.
I'm following that now.
I'd like to provide the committee with some additional information on the rationale for the bill and the work which the department is taking forward to support the future legislation, some of which has its roots during the COVID emergency. Some might ask, why do deaf people need sign language legislation when they have redress through the Disability Discrimination Act 1995, as amended by the Disability Discrimination Northern Ireland Order 2006, the Special Education Needs and Disability Northern Ireland Order 2005, and the statutory obligations arising from Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. The deaf community advises us that disability legislation is not the appropriate vehicle to ensure access to information and services through linguistic and cultural recognition. The Sign Language Bill does this. They advise that disability legislation does not support the promotion of rights of the deaf community to develop deaf culture. The Sign Language Bill does this. They advise that disability legislation does not, through the promotion of BSL and ISL, provide for classes for deaf children and their families. The Sign Language Bill does this. The social exclusion of sign language users is a pervasive issue that affects their ability to participate fully in society. Despite sign language being a legitimate and rich form of communication, a language, many deaf individuals continue to face significant barriers that hinder their involvement in everyday activity. A primary source of this exclusion can be attributed to the lack of accessibility to information and services due to the inadequate sign language interpretation. Deaf individuals may struggle to access information and essential services, leading not only to feelings of isolation and frustration, but also risk their well-being, as witnessed, for instance, during the COVID pandemic. Moreover, societal attitudes often contribute to the exclusion of sign language users. Misconceptions about deafness and sign language can lead to discrimination, stigmatization, and lack of awareness regarding the capabilities and contributions of deaf individuals. This can result in limited opportunities in the workforce and hinder their overall social integration. In summary, the social exclusion of sign language users is a multifaceted issue rooted in accessibility barriers, communication challenges, and societal attitudes. To foster an inclusive society, it is essential to address these challenges by promoting awareness, providing resources, and ensuring that sign language is recognised and valued as an integral mode of communication. The Sign Language Bill does this. The team in the department has worked with the Health and Social Care Board to set up a new free remote interpreting service for BSL and ISL users to allow deaf people to access an interpreter using their mobile phone and other devices. As the policy lead for BSL-ISL, the department had initially agreed to fund this temporary service during the COVID emergency, which would be commissioned by and monitored by the Health and Social Care Board. The Department of Health has provided the majority of funding, and the service is now a permanent resource for deaf people across all health and social care services. The department has funded remote accredited BSL-ISL courses with a view to increasing the pool of qualified deaf and hearing students to follow a pathway to qualification and registration as interpreters and translators to support future legislation. The funding has evolved and increased to support a BSL-ISL interpreter training programme delivered by the Foyle Deaf Association, with successful students due to register as accredited interpreters in the near future. In addition, the department has developed, provided funding for and launched a 2-year MA in Sign Language Interpreting at Queen's University Belfast, comprising both BSL and ISL students, both deaf and hard of hearing. This will provide an additional increase in capacity to address both the current pressures for interpreters and to contribute to the expected increase in demand with the legislation. The team has worked closely with deaf organisations specialising in the delivery of early years family sign language courses to ensure funded courses will move fully online with full support from deaf tutors. These courses have now reverted to face-to-face with the option of online support and resources. The department's funding supports learning from sign to play for babies and toddlers to accredited qualifications ranging from NVQ Level 1 beginners to Level 6 degree equivalent for parents of deaf children, to provide them with a linguistic skill set to help their deaf children acquire signing in the family home, as hearing children acquire spoken language within the family environment. At a Queen's University Sign Language Conference, The Fact of Deafness, Perception, Representation, Visibility in March 2024, the department's Northern Ireland Family Signing Programme was acknowledged by the Chief Executive of the British Deaf Association as the best of its kind across the UK. Turning to the bill, and not seeking to replicate the briefing already provided, the bill provides for the Department for Communities as the lead department and provides it with various enabling powers. The department's presence and profile, as well as its long-standing support for the deaf community and sector, has ensured it has the confidence of the deaf community in this lead policy role. The bill will ensure greater accessibility to information and services for sign language users, supported by the investment I've spoken about to increase the number of professionally trained and accredited interpreters. In welcoming the Minister's announcement on the Executive Agreement for the introduction of the Sign Language Bill to the Assembly, the British Deaf Association released a statement acknowledging the significant role played by members of the deaf community in collaboration with other deaf organisations and departments in preparation of the bill. The department will continue to engage with and support the deaf community and executive department colleagues through its lead role in the Sign Language Partnership Group. It will continue to bring its many years of experience and expertise in the sign language field, as well as its resources, and will expect and encourage other stakeholders to continue to do likewise. The bill tells us that British Sign Language and Irish Sign Language are languages. When we accept this, we can then foster that inclusive society to ensure that sign language users can fully participate in society, and we can address those feelings of isolation and frustration I've previously referenced. Moreover, those societal attitudes which often contribute to the exclusion of sign language users through misconceptions about deafness and sign language can be eradicated. Thank you for your time. We're, of course, happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, and I just want to say absolutely welcome this. I see this as I mentioned this at the committee's event in the Long Gallery. I see this as a fundamental human right, and it is a human right. I have to say that the atmosphere and the positivity in the Long Gallery that day was really inspiring, and also I think salutary in the extent that the simple reality of us moving to provide that basic cover could be so welcomed, because it was so absent previously. So I think that's really to be noted, and I suppose part of the work that we're doing. So can I just ask then what level of co-design was taken with those who use British and Irish Sign Language in the preparation of the bill?
I'm going to ask Tommy to answer that, because I've been at this a year. He has been at this probably 20 years. I think he had hair when he started. So I'm going to pass that to Tommy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you. Yes, this has its roots going way back. The Sign Language Partnership Group, which we co-chair our NIHE Secretariat for, was founded around 2008 with, at that point, the mission to improve access to services for sign language users. It's represented by executive departments and also representatives of the deaf community. The roots of the Sign Language Bill were within the Sign Language Framework back in 2015. And those objectives, of which Objective 1 is legislation, was co-designed fully with representatives from the deaf community on the group. In addition to that, as work on the bill has evolved, we have run a series of roadshows throughout Northern Ireland. We have held a sign language network at Queen's University that we funded. We seconded the manager of the British Deaf Association for Northern Ireland, Magella McAteer, so that we had real-time input on the policy development as we got closer to the bill. So at every stage along the way, we have, as Ian has alluded to in his opening statement, we have a real close relationship with the deaf community, not just at group organisation level, but actually individually within the community.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose the bill itself coming forward is welcome, but I suppose the real test will be in terms of the impact the bill will have. So what do you assess as being the tangible impact that this bill, if passed, would have on the lives of people who use sign?
I talked at the generality about destigmatisation. I thank my colleagues for giving me very long multi-syllabled words throughout that opening statement. But I think in practical terms, which I think is where you're going more, Chair, this is really around their ability to access public services and not assume that some writing along the bottom of a screen meets their needs. It doesn't. All the evidence is it doesn't. And to do that in a way that is no extra disruption for them, whether that be somebody coming in the background onto a call when they're talking to their GP or whatever it may be. Of course, we have to balance that up with what the cost and practicality of that is. And the bill talks about all reasonable steps, that public bodies will take all reasonable steps. I anticipate a number of things at committee stage being homed in on, and that could well be one of them. There is drafting around what that means. But how we find that right balance, for me, starts with fully respecting the rights of everyone in this place to access services which they need or which improve their well-being and their lives. We cannot exclude those people who rely on sign language. How we do that in a practical way, I think, is some of the detail. And then statutory rules will bring those provisions, those enabling powers, into practice. We are keen, because this journey has been such an extensive one, to try and work on some of those statutory rules in parallel with the progress of the bill, so that we don't have too long a wait to get to that practical difference.
Go ahead, Tommy.
I was just going to add to what Ian has said there, that part of the bill will be the development of best practice and statutory guidance. And referencing back to your question about co-design, we're already in that space in co-designing that best practice and guidance. The British Deaf Association are leading on this through, and they will report back to the Sign Language Partnership Group, and that will then evolve the evolution of the regulations for the bill.
Thank you. And final one for me before I go to members then is around, and you've sort of brought us on to that, I think, nicely in a way, in the sense that I presume, the outworking of this bill will mean that we will need to have more interpreters than we currently have. Is that work ongoing in parallel? What's your assessment of how many more we're likely to need to bring the bill to a tangible fruition? And is that work underway in terms of doing that training? Can that start now? Is that being considered? How are we managing?
I will answer the second part. I'll perhaps pass the numbers question to Tommy. Yes, I went and visited the Full Deaf Association before Christmas. I saw some of their interpreting classes. They are busy training people in both BSL and ISL, ISL being a particularly challenging, very small number of, single handful of interpreters at the moment in this jurisdiction, and not that many more, to be honest, in the neighbouring jurisdiction. We have now the MA, the Master of Arts in Sign Language at Queen's, that has a cohort of 20 students. So we are doing a number of things, and actually have been working, for instance, with the BBC about how to give greater resilience to their signing in their news programmes, where they were relying on quite a small number of people. So how can we both give these students more experience and widen that pool? I'll defer to Tommy in terms of numbers.
Okay, I think currently at the moment there's circa 39 sign language interpreters. In Northern Ireland, we hope that Foil Deaf Association will bring on board 4 more interpreters in the near future. As Ian has mentioned, we have linked up with Queen's recently to launch the MA. That will be that's a blend of hearing, deaf, BSL, ISL students. Now, not only that, what we found during COVID, with there were many funding support streams. We used ours to provide gainful employment for tutors to move online, to provide free, at that point, accredited qualifications in BSL, ISL, ranging from level 1 beginners to level 6 degree equivalent. And that cohort are now making their way through Foil Deaf Association, through Queen's University, and we'll press repeat, because we are conscious that, as in every profession, there's natural wastage. So some of the awful term, I know, but hopefully you appreciate what I mean. At some point, current cohort of interpreters will retire. And the concern was, and learning from other jurisdictions, when they brought in their sign language legislation, there was no throughput or pathway that was supported. I think we are fairly unique in that point, in that we are supporting students from level 1 through to level 6 degree equivalent, and then through their interpreter training programme to not only qualify as interpreters but register with the registration boards. Very much conscious that the bill will increase demand, learn the lessons from other jurisdictions.
I just pick up that strand that Tommy left there. Clause 10 of the bill talks about accreditation of teachers and interpreters, because what we don't want is a Wild West out there. We have to have accreditation. We don't envisage for that 39 or that 2-figure sum setting up our own accreditation scheme. We would envisage docking in with other accreditation schemes for operational efficiency, if nothing else, but that will be a requirement of the bill, that we can properly say you are a properly accredited signer.
Yeah, important too. And your mention of the BBC, actually, I do need to pick up on that. We as a committee have been very disappointed that the BBC within the past year have dropped their prime lunchtime slot with interpreter. We've raised that with them. I would certainly hope, I'm not putting this to you as a question because I know it's outside of but I would certainly hope that the passage of this bill will ensure that is reinstated, and that further steps are taken to provide and to normalise the use of that. I think that was a really disappointing, I have to say, step by the BBC. But
I'm not here, Chair, to be an advocate for the BBC, but we have also talked to them about that. They have made a genuine and I believe quite strong case, it's for others to consider, that actually the provision of signing of news programmes in the BBC Northern Ireland is now better than it was when it was solely restricted to that one programme at lunchtime. That is the case they would make. I'm not here to advocate for them. I'm just saying it may be a broader issue than it might appear.
Yeah. And there is certainly benefit of them increasing, and I recognise that. My feeling on that, my own feeling on that, was that this was one time in the day when people saw as a normal part of the process the sign language. And I think you're right in the sense of they are not only languages but beautiful languages. And I actually would have had time allowed, I always watched that second section just to kind of absorb it. So anyway, we'll not dwell too overly on that point, but certainly I would like to see a much broader increase of the visibility across the line. I'm hoping the bill will do some of that. So we'll go to Kelly then, please.
Thank you very much, and I absolutely welcome the sign language bill. To my absolute disgrace, although I'm a member of the deaf community, I don't sign because my hearing losses come on later in life. But there's a couple of questions about that I just wanted to check with yourselves. Chapter, I know it's not the community's committee stage at this stage, but it's just for my clarification. Prescribed organisations, obviously not proscribed organisations, prescribed organisations, it does say later in the bill that talks about that will be government departments, including communities. Do we know, or will it be listed anywhere in the explanatory notes or elsewhere, what those prescribed organisations will be? Because if it's just the departments, I'd be worried that the health trusts or GP surgeries or whoever may not be included. Is there any definition that we can look back to on what that prescribed organisations are?
I'm going to pass that one to Jared as a matter about the bill.
All public bodies will be listed, so that will include councils, arm's length bodies and all departments. There is some exceptions in clause 7 where some public bodies can be exempted from clause 3, their duties, but not departments. So okay. We'll consult with all the public bodies and make regulations and list those, but the basis of that list will be whether you're defined as a public body or not.
I'm just worried about that. For instance, if you look at a school, is that a public body? Depends on its status, I suppose.
The school itself would be under the administration of the Education Authority, or the Education Authority falls under the public body. So those details and how we...
Yeah, so I just want to address a couple of wee sort of technical points, just to say that the reason it's not in the order paper is the Speaker still completing his checks in terms of competency, and this just to flag, this is not scrutiny session, so we will get to that. This is more an information, so just want to delineate that in fairness to the panel.
But if it helps us understand what may come along in committee stage, it served a purpose.
That prescribed one, for instance, I think about voluntary grammars or grant maintained integrated. They may not come under the EA, you see, so their management bodies are different. It's just to understand that, because it's something I want to pick up on to make sure we can get this applied to as many people as possible. The other thing was, for clarification, is just to ask, I absolutely love the fact that there is a concentration on children in the bill. However, from my point of view, the deaf community is expanded by the number of older people who have hearing loss later in life, who we know are isolated and excluded from society because of the lack of communication that they have. I was just wondering in that clause 2 too, if there was any opportunity to expand those provision of classes to adults. I know it talks about in 3, to be honest, the definition of it's not 3. It's the definition of who's the deaf community is very wide, which is great, but then clause 2 takes it quite particular to children, which of course is important, but I was just wondering, is there anything there, because I'm a bit worried that training for frontline staff and adults would be key.
I mean, currently, I'll take you back to COVID and then we'll come back to where we are now as a result of that. Obviously during COVID we all experienced social exclusion, and it brought into stark focus what the deaf community have been experiencing. Now, there were a number of initiatives. We had the interpreters signing ministerial daily briefings. We have a lot of information on mainstream news, which wasn't available to the deaf community. So we supported then and continue to support Northern Ireland Deaf News, which takes news and things of interest to the deaf community, translates them into BSL, ISL. However, like every language, like my parents wouldn't have understood when they were alive some concepts that are around now, and languages evolve. The deaf older generation of deaf would use I suppose a more sort of nuanced type of signing, heavily ingrained in finger spelling. So they weren't picking up on the sort of evolution of language. The term coronavirus evolved into COVID, etc., etc., etc. So we were approached by an organisation, Deaf OAP, and they made that point. Listen, this is fantastic what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Can we have access to it through our style of signing? And we continue to support them. Now, those classes that I referred to, beginner to level 6, are open to all.
Oh, okay.
So currently you would have deaf people who are left school, for example, who want a qualification in their language and may or may not be interested in a professional career. As a result, that can have access to it and do have access to it. So those classes, even though it's referred to in level 2, are live at the moment. They may not be universal at this point, but we as a department do fund classes through introduction, level 1, level 6, open to hearing of any age. Tailored family signing classes for families with signs heavily ingrained in everyday family life. And older generation deaf people can access those courses as part of the accredited scheme.
But it's not laid out in the legislation that's specifically for children in it?
Yes, there's a heavy emphasis on children because that, again, the co-design process for us arriving at the bill was that, like any language, if you don't have new language users, the languages die out. And then when you get to that stage, there is a terminal velocity, after which point the language is gone and you can't save it. So that is why, not only that, but the research there is into the sort of beneficial effects of family signing that offsets behavioural problems, the increased mental health issues, that kids who don't have access to sign language experience in later life, we have gone heavy in that, yeah, and that's in consultation with the deaf community. Excuse me.
No, it's just I was concerned that the older people, while there's a concentration absolutely on children, and that's right, that older adults, pension age adults or late middle age, and the frontline staff that may be working with them would have access, but that's good.
I mean, the frontline staff during COVID, we reached out into care homes, so for those deaf people who are isolated in care homes and the support staff. Likewise for the children's family signing, it's their support network, creche workers, classroom assistants, teachers, and we are in regular contact with Deaf OAP organisation and
thank you.
Are informed by their advice.
Okay, thank you. So I am going to Morris on Zoom then, and then we'll come to Malaysia, and then Nicola, and then I have Brian as well. So go ahead, Morris, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. It's a long-awaited legislation. But we talk mainly here of British Sign Language and Irish Sign Language. Is there a co-designed, that phone, we throw it out the window. Is there a co-designed standardisation of sign language? When we talk about 96% of the population speak English, about 6%, maybe 5% speak Irish, but there's also Lithuanian, Polish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Arabic and Romanian people in Northern Ireland now. And I was thinking along the lines of we had a standardised, co-designed standardised sign language, that one sign language would fit all. I know it's a big ask, but has that been explored?
I suppose the simple answer to that would be, you're familiar with Esperanto, which was this mythical language throughout the world.
I knew a lady once who was fluent in Esperanto. It's just not mythical. Yeah, it was there.
Yeah, but the concept of that is that every language in the world can be, everybody will understand it. There is Castlereagh, which is for international conferences for sign language. Very few people know it. If you're a deaf professional who accesses these conferences, you will see on the stage, and we've used it, we would have BSL, ISL and Castlereagh International. But regarding, I think, hopefully one of the things the legislation will do is the key piece of a message for Hearing Society is to just view sign language sign languages and signed languages. Perhaps the problem is in the use of the noun sign language. It is like spoken languages. There are multiple languages, there are multiple dialects, there are multiple patois. For example, in the Northwest, where you have BSL and ISL mingling, you will see that intertwining and evolution of so bespoke languages. There is no plans or project or program that I'm aware of throughout the world to standardise it, because I suppose that we're making the case for deaf culture is very much ingrained in their language, BSL, ISL, Portuguese Sign Language, Libra, which is Brazilian Sign Language. Every community is part of their language. So I suppose the short answer would be no.
Morris, anything further on?
No, just a thought that we could have perhaps standardised the Irish and the British together into some sort of local sign language specific to Northern Ireland, even but it's just it's welcome. I do welcome it, but I just thought that would be an idea that we could look at in the future.
Yeah.
But no, I'm happy enough.
Yeah, no.
And I understand the need for sign language in all different languages. So just a thought. Yeah. Thank you.
I get your thought, and I suppose for me it's more a case, for me personally, it's more a case of vive la différence and the rich tapestry that we have that all languages bring. And I think it's crucial that from the very start we consider this as a language in that sense, bringing its own value in that. I do think there's an important point around how we ensure that people who maybe don't speak either of those languages are given forms of, so I do think there's a real point within that, Morris, but we'll be looking at these issues all in greater detail as we go on anyway. Just letting Sean know, we have your indication there as well, Sean, so we will be coming to you, but I'll go now to Melissa.
Well, Father Overlig and Sean, you're all very welcome here today. And it's funny just looking at the registration and the likes of it, and even the paper and that on sign language, it sort of brings home to me just that where language in itself is no threat to anyone. In fact, it's there as a means of communication, and it should be individually or person-centred in that respect, and that it's good to see that you've taken on board both the Irish sign language and British sign language, and that's reflective of that. I wish that was the same attitude was applied to all languages as well, too, in every other respect. But to get round to essentially what my question is that where you have stated too, like that the prime objective, we'll say, this legislation is so that people will be able to communicate and that there with statutory authorities or departments and the likes of it, and that in your response to a question from our chair, you had when he asked about the financial implication and the amount of people who would be there available, say, within the different departments and so on. And you had said that it would be where it seemed to be reasonable in terms of departments. Does that concern you? In fact, and it being described as being seen to be reasonable, if that's decided by departments, can that be used as a cop-out?
I think in all of life there is a balance to be struck, and these people are very badly excluded. The average deaf person will leave school with little to no qualifications, with a reading age and not intellectual age, but an outworking of that age below teenage. And if you read books written by the deaf community, there's one that I've passed around the team. There are people driven to suicide and all sorts of things. They are horrendously excluded. It is discriminatory. They are mocked. All of these things. So I would argue very hard for a decent amount of funding to be provided. And to give you a feel, we currently, for the programs that Tommy mentioned, it's around about £500,000 a year. So just to give you a feel of the scale, in the big scheme of things, it isn't very much that is needed to make this profound difference for some of the people who live here. But we cannot do anything with complete ignorance of where we are financially, in where we sit with that. So I do think small amounts of money will make a profound difference. If we didn't put in the phrases reasonable, the courts would construe those in anyway and would form their own judgments. We are trying to do that up front and be open about it rather than leave it to a case law later on. And I'm sure we will return to this issue as we go through the committee stage and the clause by clause.
I just hope that you will get the service that you definitely deserve in every respect for the deaf community, and both British and the Irish Sign Language.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah,
with
go ahead,
your
please,
information? There is already a service in place that we helped us set up, as Ian mentioned at the start, with the Health and Social Care Services, the Regional Communication Support Service, and we're represented on the board of that. And that has evolved from the COVID emergency intervention to a remote and face-to-face interpreting service. Also takes on board lip reading and note-taking, and that service is there for the health and deaf people to access all health and social care services. So there's already models there that we can look at. And the reference within the bill to taking reasonable steps then goes on to mention that something is accessible to individuals in the deaf community for the purpose of this section, if as well as being accessible to them in general terms, including as respects of convenience, access is at no extra cost to them. So part of the work we'll be doing through the Sign Language Partnership Group with our colleagues and partners in the deaf community through best practice and statutory guidance is looking at what is reasonable. Is it access all areas, which are the feedback we've got so far is no, key services. And then through that guidance and best practice, we will be able to establish what is the best model and what the costs are likely to be.
Okay, thank you. So I have a few extra members have come in now, so just bear that in mind time-wise, please, members. So I'm going then to Nicola, and then we're going to Brian, then Sharon. Go ahead, Nicola. Our new Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your briefing. As the Chair says, it's my first meeting of the committee, so it's my introduction to this here bill, so I do appreciate your update. I suppose the first question is, there will be, if this bill is enacted, there'll be a legal requirement or statutory requirement on public bodies to provide access to information services through sign language. Can you first of all give us an indication of how that will actually, what that will actually look like when it's implemented, and how you propose to monitor and evaluate how successful it is, I suppose, and if changes will need to be made down the line?
I'll just start that off and then I'll pass the harder bit to Jared to my left. The bill will set out the public bodies that are required under statute to follow through this process. That doesn't mean that others can't, but they are the ones prescribed, as Kelly said earlier. And then there will be statutory guidance produced by the department going through the consultation and the subsidiary legislation routes through this committee and through the Assembly as to what that means. That will be framed by best practice, it will be framed by the reasonableness test and so on, but it will really set out the what is to be done. I'll let Jared pick then up anything more on that and the monitoring piece.
I couldn't really add much more than that, Ian. The statutory guidance will set out for any public body the steps they should take, and they must have regard to that statutory guidance, which will be fully consulted on with the deaf community and the committee and all interested bodies. So it'll be on that basis, it'll be on a one-by-one issue that you decide whether something's reasonable or not, and following the guidance that's statutory made, they'll make those determinations.
Do you want to pick up the monitoring piece?
The monitoring of that, we were doing a report every 5 years. Okay. In relation to that. That's also within the bill, and we're obliged to do that. So.
And will that be in conjunction with the deaf community?
Everything we do will be in conjunction with the deaf community. I mean, they're the main stakeholder here, so yes. We won't be taking a step forward without have.
And that is protected within the bill as it stands, that we must consult with the deaf community. The current situation is that there are some contracts across the public service for video remote service, which is if you're deaf, you have an app on your phone, you dial in, sign, and then make a phone call on your behalf. Other public bodies will provide face-to-face interpreting, and that's the current model, and that's what should happen on their Disability Discrimination Act adjustment. Now, whether it does is another issue. And I've referred to our health and social care currently provide support for the sign language community.
Just one final question, Chair. I suppose, and like obviously this is really, really important for the deaf community, and they've been arguing for this here for a long time. But you know, there is that their stigma, I suppose, attached to it, and they've I imagine, experienced their own kind of issues throughout the years with that. So I wonder, is there an element here of education for people of hearing ability throughout the community, and do you expect there to be an increased usage within the rest of the community of using sign language because of the bill?
I think if we can make inroads in destigmatisation, and that isn't just the legislation, but that hopefully will be a catalyst to a wider societal understanding. I would anticipate people who may be able to sign but don't do it, don't choose to do it, and people may want to learn it, and there will be an osmosis out through the process. With any language, if you go back to language models, the Fishman model or whatever, it is visibility and normalisation of that visibility. With sign language, it's particularly visible. It's not just on the walls, it's in front of you. If we normalise that, and if this bill can take a step on that journey, I think it's a really, really important step.
That's an important point too, and hopefully this will help to encourage others to use it. But thank you for that there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, and many years ago, or since many years ago, I have tried several times actually to get on courses. Our own local college, Southwest College, has done it. And every time I've applied, it's been oversubscribed already, and I've never managed to get. But I do intend to get back to it. But I think it shows you the demand out there, and you know, it certainly shows that. Brian, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your attendance today. I mean, reading through the bill, the bill's only the start of your role. The department will have that ongoing responsibility as the lead department, and looking through the sections on issuing guidance, best practice, making regulations, and the 5 yearly reports. So I want to ask, what resource will the department be committing to that role that it is playing when it takes on these enabling powers in terms of promoting but also evaluating what has been done by other public bodies?
I think it's fair to say we're working through the detail of that. Currently, the team, which includes Tommy and Jared and a job share partner, Patricia, who I mentioned earlier, there are 2 other members of the team who are more focused on the outreach training, that support, rather than being with the bill. As the bill moves through, the bill work will reduce. The follow-up, as you say, Mr. Kingston, will grow. How we manage, is there going to be a central service for signing, is it going to be part of the translation hub, etc., needs to be worked through as to where the different resource lines sit, if you like, across the department. We're working through sign language of itself, connection with our other linguistic duties, our other cultural duties, so it's not something we've lost sight of. I don't envisage it being a vast increase in overall resource. I think it will be a changing from some of the legislative duties to some of the consequential duties, if you like, alongside continuing to support the deaf community, support the training and accreditation pieces.
And I could just add to that, we already have the vehicle in place to do that through the Sign Language Partnership Group, which we chair and provide secretariat to, and bearing in mind that the bill is cross-cutting, and it is not just the Department for Communities that will have obligations or need to bring resource to that. We've already done it. We've outlined some of the various projects and programmes we support, and including bridging the gap with yourselves and trying to ready the assembly for the bill as well. So we have a pretty wide network of partners and collaborations where we promote sign language. And going back again to the health and social care contract that was at our instigation, that at the start of COVID we went and promoted the service. So there are ways and means, and we do expect other partners to come on board.
Okay.
Really
brief, Brian, please.
No, and just to comment on that, as in all bills which are cross-cutting, it's important that one department all departments will have to take action, but it's important that one is also maintains that lead role, and has a resource.
And that's set down in the bill,
yeah,
assuming it's enacted.
Yeah, I see that. And the other comment, can you say a bit more in practice how, and you've maybe referenced some of this, how you would see this being delivered, the greater provision of sign language interpreting, and some public bodies may be able to have, and on occasions or regularly have staff present as interpreters, but you also referenced to online technological support. Could you say a wee bit more about how that might roll out?
I think, as in all things, technology will play a growing part, whether we like it or loathe it, it will play a growing part. And the concept of wanting to have a conversation with your GP, if I just take that as an example, often that can be scheduled, sometimes it's a more urgent conversation. Having an app on your phone where you can push a button and that calls in a signer in BSL or ISL in the background onto the phone, the GP has the same thing. I suspect that's going to be a route more than all traipsing along to the local surgery or whatever, which has just its complexities around it. Quite what that technology looks like, quite how far that goes, quite how far, dare I say, AI and other things play a part in that, are yet to be fully worked through. But I would envisage, on demand really, there would be free at the point of use access to signing in the required sign language. That's why we have to have enough of the interpreters there on call. And I would see, as it already is, as Tommy said, in the health and social care setting, that is centralised to the various trusts. Probably a model that has that centralised for all public bodies. There may be some, as you suggested, Mr. Kingston, who may have sufficient call on that they have their own facility and manage peaks and troughs. I do think quite a lot of it will be centralised within our department. One of the main calls on the translation hub is our benefits colleagues, the front of office. I would anticipate that being a big call on the signing service as well, just from the sheer numbers and the volumes. Having that available, not needing to go to the Bangor JBO or the Enniskillen JBO or whatever it is, being able to do it with technology. I wouldn't like to say quite how AI and other things will play into that space. I'm too old to have fully worked through all of those technological pieces.
Okay,
thank you, Chair. And actually thank you, Ian, for that reference to Enniskillen, because I think that's going to be a crucial thing to ensure those services reach out into those more rural areas. We've actually touched earlier on the other deprivation in those areas existing, so that's another
other constituents as well, but I chose one not at random, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. So Sian, I'm going to you there, Sian. So if I could ask you, Sian, just to be as succinct as possible, please. Thank you. We may not have Sian online. I'll just give it another second or two.
The mic's on now.
Yeah, the mic's on. So your mic's on, Sian. Go ahead. We don't see you, but maybe we can hear you. So we're seeing you now, Sian, but still not hearing.
Sorry, I think my internet has just cut out.
Yep, go ahead. We're hearing you now, Sian. Thank you.
Great. The Vice Chair actually asked the main crux of my question, which was around the monitoring and evaluation of the statutory obligations. So it was really, and then my second question was about budgetary allocations going forward for this. But I just want to say how refreshing it is to hear sign language being talked, not just about, not just in terms of disability, as a beautiful language and a culture. So I think that's really important. But yeah, just something about the budget going forward that the team thinks will.
Thank you. You were breaking up quite badly there, Sian, but we got the full sense of it, I do believe, and I'll go back to Ian. So thank you, Ian.
Yes, I think for what I heard Oswald Holland saying, it was, we've talked about the monitoring, we've talked about the budget. I've given a sense that it's around about £500,000 that we are supporting these different things with at the moment. I think that may give a sense of scale. We're still trying to work through. It's proving very difficult to get anywhere near definitive on how many Irish Sign Language users, how many British Sign Language users are there. Different studies, some of them are referenced in the paper we provided. In the census, there's a self-declaration about different languages. It is a self-declaration from the tiniest usage to being level 6. So we have struggled to get to definitive numbers, even with all our stakeholder work, which does make it slightly difficult to get to budget numbers as well. But that will be a part of an ongoing journey through this, the next stages of the process.
And part of that analysis that we're carrying out is looking and learning lessons across the piece. Certainly with the Regional Communication Support Service that Department of Health provides, that is a rich vein of volume of callers
Yes.
that are using the service that will give us some insight. Now, we know that like everyone across society, everyone at some stage will need healthcare. So they'll be the largest user by probably considerable distance. Then you'll have things like benefits, access to councils, housing executive, and that will give us some sort of baseline to go on that we will try to extrapolate figures from. And again, once the work with the British Deaf Association and the Sign Language Partnership Group on best practice and statutory guidance completes, we'll have an even better picture of what services to what level are be provided for sign language interpreting or translations.
Okay, thank you. And so, listen, as I said, we are going to obviously, there's a significant piece of work here, a very welcome piece of work, and I appreciate the start we've made today in terms of the information, and as Sean has noted there, that kind of, which comes across that drive and passion to treat it as a language and absolutely an asset to all of us and part of that rich culture. But for now, thank you, and we will see you again soon. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Members, I'm going to propose we take a quick comfort break there, and we could come back for 11:25 and try to get restarted again. We're pushing the clock as ever, so just take a quick break. Thank you. And ask the clerk to suspend the broadcasting.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Thank you, Chris. You up on your own today?
She confirms now.
Okay, members, thank you. So we are back in broadcasting and resuming our meeting then at briefing at agenda item 11. So this is a briefing from Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council and the Department for Communities on the Landlord Registration Scheme. And a copy of the briefing, members, is attached there at page 250 of your pack. So, I would now like to welcome the following officials to our meeting. We have firstly Kieran Devlin, who is Deputy Director of the Housing Supply Policy in DFC. Julie Lavery, Head of Private Rented Branch, DFC. David Burns, Chief Executive, Lisburn and Castlereagh Council. Maria Curran, Landlord Registrar, NI in Lisburn and Castlereagh Council. And I'll return, I think it's yourself, David, maybe to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you.
I'd start and then
if
that's
yep,
okay, Chair.
that's fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Firstly, thanks to the committee for giving us a chance to talk about the operational transfer of the scheme to Lisburn and Castlereagh. I'd say you've already received your written briefing and you kind of seen what the long-term aims and objectives of the transfer are. So I'd like to go over a few of the key points now and then hand over to David, who will outline what's going to happen post-transfer. Okay. So, as you'll be aware, the scheme was introduced in 2014 with landlords being required to register from February 2015. I suppose it was always seen as the starting point for developing a profile of the number of landlords and properties in the private rented sector, and aligned with that a key aim to raise standards and improve tenancy management. So the scheme has had some successes. There are currently 41,000 registered landlords, which equates to around 77,000 private rented properties. However, we know from some very high level comparison with the census, there could be anywhere up to 40,000 landlords not registered. So I suppose the other thing we have to acknowledge is that the scheme has been limited in terms of raising standards, although we do have evidence to suggest that registered landlords are more aware of and compliant with their legislative responsibilities. So I suppose, for example, the number of protected tenancy deposits broadly correlates with the number of properties on the register. So there's a direct link between landlords understanding what their responsibilities are if they're registered. So acknowledging that there were clearly limitations in terms of central government fulfilling what is essentially an operational function for which we had no enforcement role, we commissioned some work to explore the possibility of transferring the scheme to councils. This work identified several benefits from transferring the function to local government, including better joined-up working across statutory agencies, additional ways to support enforcement, and consistency in the management of the private rented sector. So in March 23, Solace nominated Lisburn and Castlereagh as the lead council to work with the department. Since this time, we've worked together with Lisburn and Castlereagh to successfully deliver the transfer, and we are on track to deliver it by the agreed transfer date of the 3rd of March this year. So after the transfer, the fee generated will transfer across to Lisburn and Castlereagh to support the running costs of the scheme and in time to develop some potential pilot projects around improving compliance and raising standards. So we haven't done this alone. Throughout the transfer, we've consulted with a reference panel of key stakeholders. There's been quite an extensive communication strategy, and that is including engaging with landlords, tenants, agents and councils, so we all understand where we all sit from the 3rd of March. So the main benefits of the transfer, so we councils with their local knowledge of the PRS in their areas are clearly better placed to build an accurate picture of PRS in Northern Ireland, both in terms of numbers and quality, and they'll have the ability to drive improvements across the sector in terms of standards and management. The transferred scheme will contribute to wider strategic objectives in the housing supply strategy, so achieving the vision of everyone having access to a good quality, affordable, sustainable home. The success of the transfer, and I suppose ultimately the scheme, will eventually be measured by an increase in compliance and standards, with landlords more aware of their responsibilities. At present, we don't have specific standards set. However, that's something that we are specific target set, but that's something that we're going to work with Lisburn and Castlereagh over the next, and other councils over the next 12 months. We see this initial period of time as bedding down systems, people understanding the roles, and making sure that the new IT system is working properly as well, things like that. But in time, we will, of course, establish quantitative and qualitative indicators around user satisfaction levels and things like that. So post-transfer and taking into account any potential changes to regs, we'll work with councils to see how we can better measure compliance and standards. You'll be aware from the written briefing that these proposed changes will make it a requirement for landlords to declare whether or not their property is compliant with a fitness standard, the new smoke, heat and carbon monoxide alarm and electrical safety requirements, and in the future, minimum energy efficiency standards. So post-transfer, I'll shortly hand you over to David, who can talk about Lisburn and Castlereagh's plans for the future of the scheme. But just very briefly touch on what the department's responsibilities remain post-transfer. So we will continue to have policy and legislation responsibility for the registration scheme. We will continue to work closely with Lisburn and Castlereagh Council, and indeed all councils, to achieve our shared objective to develop the scheme and increase the standards and compliance rates across private rented sector. This will include offering advice, support and guidance and assisting Lisburn and Castlereagh in the formulation, development, review and evaluation of the scheme. So basically, to sum up, this has been an issue that has been in the pipeline for quite some time. We see this as a really exciting opportunity to improve standards and compliance across the PRS and work together more effectively with all our stakeholders, councils, tenants and the third sector, and importantly landlords. So I'll just hand you over to David now, who maybe talk through the operating model.
Thanks, David. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, Committee. Thank you very much for the invitation to present to Committee this morning. Kieran outlined how the Council and the Department are working jointly on this initiative. Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council stand ready to deliver this project on behalf of all councils in Northern Ireland. We're currently working to a project plan to deliver on time and within budget to meet a go-live date of the 3rd of March 2025. Details of the draft website planned are included within your pack presented today. After go live, we will continue to work with landlords and other stakeholders over the next few months to refine the system as necessary. 2 of the 3 landlord registration team have now commenced in their role, with the 3rd due to start imminently. And Maria here has recently been appointed as the registrar for the system in Northern Ireland. This team will support all councils through training and advice as necessary. The committee should be aware the real benefit is not in the transfer of this function in its current mode. It is a potential for an improved private rented sector through collaboration with DFC to consider the wider role the sector can play in the housing supply in Northern Ireland. Our team will coordinate council ideas through the programme board for further consideration by our DFC colleagues. This may require legislative change in due course. The scheme must deliver at a cost-neutral position to councils, and we will keep costs under review as the years progress. I'll now pass back to Kieran for any concluding remarks, and then I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, that's kind of the end of our collective overview, and of course happy to take questions or any points of clarification.
Okay, well, listen, thank you for that. That's a very useful outline, I have to say. I welcome this work. I think it's hugely important, and I do welcome the repeated references to raising standards and compliance, and I think that is really where the value of this work will come in. It is, and I acknowledge, that there are many and vast numbers of very good landlords. However, even in terms of a constituency work, there are some horrendous examples of where, this really does need to be properly monitored, properly regulated, and standards raised in certain areas. I do get a strong sense of purpose and commitment, I have to say, to the engagement in the work, and I welcome that as well. And I also welcome the department's continuing commitment to continue to support Lisburn Council in their central role in doing this on behalf of all of the councils. So I want to wish you all the best on that. I have no questions at this stage. I'll see if I can pick up at the end. I'm going to go now to members, so I'm starting off with Brian. Lanner, Brian.
Thank you, Chair. That was quick. Thank you for your attendance today. So the thing that jumps out at me is there's currently 77,000 on the register and estimated to be 130,000 private let. So, 40% not registered. Is it a statutory requirement for private landlords to be registered then?
Yeah.
So there's no two ways about it. It's not in any way voluntary. It's a statutory requirement. Yeah. What is the consequences of not registering?
It is a legislative requirement. The way the regulations have been written, they're very restrictive in terms of how we share information and use other sources of information. So it's been difficult then to target those landlords that are not registered. We are doing some exciting work then with the Audit Office and the Cabinet Office, using their legislation around fraud prevention to allow us to actually then compare the landlord registration data to other sources of data that may allow us then to really target those landlords that are not registered. It is going to be our universal credit data, which is around 38,000 records, rating data, which is around 104,000 records, and housing benefit data, which is around another 30,000 records. So we hope then that will help us target landlords. Then, as you say, the consequence then of not registering, there is fines of up to £2,500 for not registering and also providing false information, which brings in some of the other work we're going to do about, that you have to declare if you comply with other standards, and there also is fixed penalty notices. So hopefully that then allows us then to clarify and quantify KPIs and work then closely with Lisburn and Castlereagh Council and other councils then in targeting those landlords.
The data matching exercise is kind of a really key milestone in terms of the registration scheme. We've had difficulty for many years trying to cross-reference, which kind of supposes people would have thought they're internal government systems, and of course they speak to each other, but with data sharing agreements that's not always the case. Using the powers of the NIHE, we expect this to be quite a successful piece of work, and we'll work closely with David and his team as that data matching exercise progresses, and kind of how the administration of that as we go through it.
Right. Can I ask a wee bit further on that? Because it often astonishes me how poorly information flows between statutory bodies. And as you've mentioned, you'd thought through the housing benefit, there'd be an obvious if somebody's declared as a private rental, and for councils, environmental health, departments. Are you saying something has changed recently that will improve that flow of information?
The regulations haven't changed. They're very restrictive in terms of how we share data, but when we're reviewing the legislation, we will aim to rectify that issue. We can't even share information within our own department around that because they're written very, very strictly. But what we have been able to do then is use the Audit Office legislation, which trumps our legislation around fraud prevention. But that is a one-off exercise. So then when we're looking at what we need and changes to regulations, then we'll look to embed that about sharing data for particular purposes in changes to those regulations, and obviously they'll be brought back to the committee for scrutiny.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Kelly, Landlord.
Thank you very much, folks. I'm very excited by this because I think it'll answer a lot of the questions that the committee has had about private landlords and private renters. There's a couple of things. So where the landlords are not registered or compliant or found to be compliant in the future, the landlord registration scheme, I'm assuming, will not take that forward. That would be registered back to the department. Is it to take forward action, or is that for Lisburn and Castlereagh to do that?
So there's probably a few steps in there. You can imagine with the timing of the Audit Office data matching exercise, it's going to cross over the transfer of the management of the function to ourselves. So through Maria and our team, we will do that initial legwork to try to encourage landlords to register. And if they fail to do that, we will then link with our council colleagues across 11 councils for enforcement to be progressed through environmental health teams.
Okay, so it'll be individual councils will do that. And that leads me on to the money side of this. So the fees, to be honest, the fee, talking about 70 going up to £80, is that per landlord or per property that they have?
Per landlord.
Per landlord, because there will be landlords who have many properties and landlords that only have one, and the majority will be those that only have one or two properties. I'm just wondering if the compliance or pushing for people to register is with each individual council, are they getting, or I know they've talked here in the papers about Lisburn and Castlereagh will receive the fees because you're running the system basically, but what about those other councils? I'm just aware of how much work the environmental health officers do. Will they be getting anything that will support them in the work that they will be doing with regards to private landlords?
I think initially, as I said, there'll be a bend in time to try and get the systems and operations in place, but we've been working closely with David and his friends in Solace to see if we can develop pilot programs and to see how we can engage other councils, and eventually so that the benefits of the landlord registration scheme, the aim is that they'll be felt much more widely than through Lisburn and Castlereagh. That's the aim, but I think Dave, you maybe want to touch on that. There is definitely a future where it's the other councils will be able to take the benefit of the transfer.
I can't have a position where this data matching exercise results in 1,000 cases having to be investigated by the environmental health team of Council A without any additional resource. So we will be working closely with Kieran and his team to consider how a pilot could support increased resources to councils.
Well, I'd be hoping there'd be more registrations just coming directly through to get sorted out. My final question, Chair, is about this landlord registration scheme and the private renters themselves. So we've been provided very kindly with snapshots of the website, and it talks about, the property dashboard of one landlord, and it lists all their properties. I'm just wondering, will there be any access from private renters to view? Say, for instance, they've looked at a house and an estate agent's, they're interested in that and they want to find out more about maybe the landlord and how compliant they are. Will they be able to access some of the data?
Well, with the regulations as they currently stand, then the only access that anybody who's wanting to see if the landlord, all they'll find out is if that landlord or property is registered. So using the public search, they can go in and search by a landlord and they'll get a name and a number, which is their landlord certificate number. or feeling that then if they know the property they can go in and get a return to see if it's property or not, if that's been registered. Details about individual landlords and their properties are not currently available, and I know landlords are quite protective about that, just that what information is put out there about how many properties somebody would own or and who would have access to that information. So currently all that can be found is either they are registered or the property is registered, and that's at the minute that's in line with legislation. That's all that we can offer.
I'm a little concerned about that because, to be honest, there are some landlords who are brilliant and there are some landlords who are not, and there's some tenants who don't want to touch those not landlords with a 10-foot barge pole, but it's very hard to find out who they are if there's an agent involved. I'm just wondering in future with the compliance, and the extra things that are coming through the Private Tenancies Act, is there like a tick box that could say as part of the registration it means that they have complied with the standards?
Again, I think that would depend on the regulation change to allow us to share that information. But certainly there would be, I don't think that, I'm saying that, everything in IT is slightly more tricky than I realised when I started this project, but I don't see there would be, down the line there would be a way to allow that information to be shared. Currently though, as Julie touched on about the false information being provided, I mean, if someone says that they are honest and they say they're not compliant, they're still technically a registered landlord. So it's just then how all that would be balanced as well. There would be nuances about how we share it, because somebody could say, oh yeah, I am compliant, but they're maybe not, and then they would get a green tick by somebody who's being honest and saying, well no, I'm not compliant, would get a red X or however that would look. So we would just have to be careful about how all that would work out then in a practical term.
Just thinking that social housing tenants have the ombudsman that they could go to if there's an issue. There's nobody that private renters can go to, so it's one thing I know I'd be very keen in the future that the more evidence that a private renter can have for their choice, then the better. So yeah, it's not about saying landlord X has 56 properties or one property. It's about that compliance. Are they tax registered, VAT registered? Are they compliant with the standards? Are they, yeah.
Just in terms of my opening statement, I said about trying to improve the private rented sector within the housing supply of Northern Ireland. I think there's far more we can do in the longer term with regards to support and advice to both landlords and tenants to make sure that this is a sector that can be used effectively across the board. So this is something that we will continue to explore with our DFC colleagues.
There's massive opportunity. Thank you very much. A lot of hard work. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you indeed. So Sian, I know her question has been picked up by Kelly, so I'm going to move then to Nicola. And Morris, we do have your indication. We'll be coming to you after Nicola. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your briefing too. I'm completely new to this here committee, so bear with me. These questions might be quite basic, but maybe you could explain to me what role the 11 councils have at the minute in regards to the landlord registration and how this transfer to Lisburn Council will affect them. And in your dealings with the other councils, how supportive have they been with this here transfer of functions?
You maybe want to pick up, David, with your engagements through Solace around?
Sure, no bother. Thanks for the question, Nicola. In terms of the council involvement in this, as Kieran mentioned, this started off as an appraisal back in sort of 2020, 2021 to look at whether the function could transfer to councils. I have experience of landlord registration from Scotland, so I was very keen on it from day one. Some of my colleagues in the other councils through Solace had a wee bit of trepidation about it. It was very much seen as a database of landlords without any real impact in terms of what it could achieve. So we worked very closely through the Environmental Health Northern Ireland Officers Group to get a feel from them as to what they would like to see. Part of the aspirations from a council perspective is for this to have more teeth in terms of that compliance piece to really drive up the quality, particularly around about the fitness standard and the like. And this is the things that the DFC and ourselves will explore through the programme board in due course. In terms of the roles just now for councils, in terms of the existing system, it has very much been about that compliance where a rogue landlord or a poorly performing landlord is brought to their attention. potentially this new system with Maria and the team taking control of it, there'll be far more proactive identification of landlords that are not meeting particular standards. And to the point previously made, how we manage that resource and how we ensure that our environmental health teams have sufficient capacity to undertake that work is crucial. So there will be a lot of support provided through Maria and our team in the short term to try and do that sort of carrot and stick approach, where we are working closely with landlords and outlining the legislative requirements before we go down the enforcement route.
It'll be a work in progress across the council.
Absolutely.
That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. And moving on then to Maurice Bradley. Maurice, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a very welcome and a very positive step, which could lead to vast improvements across the rented sector. I've only a couple of questions because the other ones have been answered. And the first one I'd like to ask the panelists there, and thank you very much for your presentation, but will there be any enforcement mechanisms that can be introduced? And will there be financial penalties for landlords who fail to register? And do local councils have legal authority to take enforcement action if needed? There's only 3 questions left.
Maybe will I start that off? I suppose, yeah, there is in legislation. There's a fines of up to £2,500, not only in failing to register, but if you give false information. So that links very much to when we do bring in that they have to declare that smoke alarms and electrical safety. So councils do have the power to enforce that through the private tenancies order. And also in linking standards more explicit landlord registration through the regulations, then that opens up some of the resources to help then the councils then use that for enforcement activity, including spot checks. And but I say that is kind of a longer term thing, but there is already enforcement powers there, but it's about using those resources more effectively. David, do you want to add anything?
I think you've covered it well there, Julie. As was said in the opening speech, there's 77,000 landlords registered. Census details might well say 130,000. If we can get all of those registered, increases the financial resource available to undertake some of this activity. If we find that the resources required are insufficient for that enforcement, the alternative would be to look at reviewing the landlord registration fee. All of that will happen in due course.
Like, just pick up on David's point you made at the start about this being cost neutral, and that's central to our agreement post-transfer. Can't encumber councils.
Okay. Okay, well listen, thank you. That's a very useful piece of information. I know it's something that the committee, I think from memory, we have asked for kind of a regular update on this just to see how it rolls out, but I think that's a very good start in terms of providing that context and detail around that. So thank you all for your attendance here today, and we'll continue to engage with you as we see necessary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, members, just want to pick up if there's anything from that session that members want to flag or pick up following any follow-up actions.
Yeah, I understand that environmental health and the other councils going out to check on standards and things like that there. When do they go out to do that? Is this a proactive thing or is this a reactive thing? And if it's reactive, where's it reacting from? I just don't understand. Is this a tenant can actually report them to the council or what that? If we could just maybe ask Gillian and Kieran if we can get an idea on the thinking behind that.
Yeah, and is that directed to the department in the first instance or the
Lisburn?
Department? Yeah, absolutely, Brian.
Yep. Well, I think we should, regarding the 40% that aren't on the scheme, I think we should be asking the department through the minister or directly the department, how they are assisting with that flow of information, because the department must have information, through the benefit system. I know there's data protection, but there must be information that can be fed into this scheme. It always astounds me that flow of information doesn't happen, and so that given that it's now in a new setting, that the department, hopefully, perhaps there might be better flow between councils now that it's a council managing it, but just that the department is also examining how they can ensure any data that they can pass on is being done.
Do members want to ask, does it require legislative change? I thought maybe one of the officials outlined that there was maybe a bit of a restriction there, and whether that would require legislative reform.
Yeah, I think that's valid to ask, is that the case? And I think also I would like to add to that, outside of, beyond the flow of information, what other steps are being considered to close that gap? It is a substantial gap, Brian, I agree with you. I think we should maybe ask what else is being considered. You know, the information in itself might not fully close the gap, so let's see what else is being done.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, members, thank you. So we'll move on then to agenda item 12, which is a briefing from the Department for Communities and from the Housing Executive on youth homelessness. So I'll just get the panel set up and then we will proceed. I think they are all here, aren't they?
Chris is bringing in Housing Executive.
Well, you're more than enough on your own, sure. We'll grill you on all aspects. Okay. Oh. Yep, okay. Thank you. So I'd now like to welcome the following officials to our meeting this morning. We have David Polly, who's Director of Housing Supply Policy, and welcome back, David. We have Jennifer Hawthorne, who's Director of Housing Services in the Housing Executive, and Richard Tanswell, who is Head of Homelessness Policy and Strategy in NIHE. So I just want to say, before we start the session, I would like to declare as an interest that I am working on a private member's bill in relation to homelessness, in relation to the intervention periods and extending that to get help and support in earlier. So we want to just declare that. But also just to set the context of, I was deeply struck by a session, and one of the earlier sessions of this committee, where we heard from Action for Children in relation to a young man who spent his 18th birthday alone in a hotel in Fermanagh, and that kind of just troubles me to a degree. You know, the desolation, the loneliness of all of that, I think is something that we absolutely have to address, and I welcome today's session and hearing more from yourselves in relation to that. So I'll go first of all then, I think it's David, it's yourself doing an opening statement, and then we'll move to members. Yeah, it was Paddy, it was the name of that young man. And it was Paddy's story. So I'll go, David, then to yourself for an opening statement, then we'll come to members. Thank you.
Very much. So I'm David Polly, I'm Director of Housing Supply Policy in the Department for Communities. Thanks for the invite to talk about this. I just wanted to start off by pointing out that Minister Lyons and myself attended the All-Party Group for Youth Participation. So Minister Lyons has also attended the All-Party Group on Homelessness at the very start of his time. So he's very aware of these issues and has taken a real interest in them and has been quite active across this part of it. So the first point is that everyone except as a full duty applicant is owed the full duty housing status, which includes ensuring that accommodation is made available, as well as the provision of temporary accommodation. And the young people are absolutely no different in this regard when it comes to Housing Executive's obligation to meet this duty. However, it has been established that young people have very distinct experiences with homelessness, and that those are quite often different from other people who are experiencing homelessness. And if there's one point that I think we want to land, is that the Housing Executive has done a lot of work over the last few years to make sure it accepts and acknowledges those different experiences mean different responses, and that you need to change your systems and what you do in order to make sure that whilst the duty is the same, the fundamental human right is the same for housing, that the young people are treated differently within that system, which can be, as you said, maybe quite disorientating, complex thing to go through. So just to set out roles and responsibilities, the Department is responsible for housing policy, and I suppose I'd want to highlight that one of the 5 key objectives in the housing supply strategy is the prevention of homelessness and prioritising housing solutions for those most in need. However, the prevention of youth homelessness is also obviously an operational matter for the Housing Executive, and the Housing Executive carries out the strategic work of that as part of its obligation in the legislation to produce a homelessness strategy. So that being the case, this is why we have Jennifer, who is the Head of
Richard
and Landlord Services, and Richard, who is the Head of Homelessness Strategy within the Housing Executive, who frankly know most of the detail about what happens, so I'm very glad and reassured to have them beside me today. So I will hand over to Jennifer later, but there's a few things I wanted to touch on what the department's doing. Obviously, youth homelessness is part of, and homelessness generally is part of a complex set of challenges that some of our young people face. These include issues around mental health and addiction, following release from prison, or issues raised from transitioning from the care system, which is something which is very often raised when it comes to youth homelessness. Addressing homelessness and housing among young people and families with children is and will continue to be a very distinct priority for the Housing Executive. And while data collected has shown a very welcome reduction in presentation acceptances over the last 5 years, there's also an element of hidden homelessness as well, which the Housing Executive and Simon community have highlighted with us, with young people sometimes residing temporarily or sofa surfing with family members and friends and things like that. You raised some mentioned temporary accommodation, and it's worth pointing out this is in very high demand at the minute, and whilst it's not ideal anyone's ever in temporary accommodation, especially non-standard, it is constrained by what is available on a given day, and the Housing Executive has a duty to do that. And we have been told that sometimes this can mean that young people are placed in generic adult accommodation, which is not ideal, sometimes not within their area of choice or within easy access to their education or employment or their support networks, and this is far from ideal. But it is temporary accommodation, and therefore by its very nature the Housing Executive has to be reactive, and it can't always meet everyone's requirement. But I think that there are things that we can do to improve our temporary accommodation offer more generally and with this group of people, and we're working with the Housing Executive to find ways of doing this. We're also looking at ways to increase the speed at which people move through the system, which frees up more supported spaces and also reduces the amount of time people spend in inappropriate temporary accommodation placements. So we also address this need to work collaboratively across different areas, and the Housing Executive might want to touch on that. To talk about what the department does, we chair the Homelessness Strategy Steering Group to bring together officials from across government, the Housing Executive and homelessness sector to work together to prevent and tackle homelessness. And one of the objectives of this group is around looking over the homelessness strategy and the interdepartmental homeless action plan, which complements the Housing Executive's homeless strategy. So this focuses on addressing gaps in non-accommodation services that have potential to improve the lives and life chances of those who are experiencing homelessness or most at risk of homelessness. More specifically in and around health and wellbeing, including mental health and substance use, the Department of Health, education and awareness raising for children, young people, schools and providers, support for people leaving care, including children's residential and foster care, support for families, including those experiencing domestic violence, community support mechanisms that interface with DOJ and DOH's work there too, and employability, financial capability and access to benefits, so things which happen within our department. There's a lot of work going on there. The department's supporting people's programme grant funds the provision of housing related support to enable vulnerable people to live independently in the community. In terms of homelessness services, includes provision of short-term accommodation services and floating support services, and the homelessness sector receives around £24 million a year within the supporting people budget. A few other things I'd like to mention quickly include the Complex Lives model in Belfast, and the key action is supporting people living with mental health and addiction issues, which are often interrelated, and quite distressingly a large number of those people are care experienced and have come into the system very young. Very prominently, I'd want to mention that the draft PFG contains an undertaking for DFC, DOH and other partners to develop a pilot programme to support young people leaving care and to help protect this group from risk of homelessness, and this work is called New Foundations. Jennifer, and Richard, you'll want to talk about the Youth Homeless Action Plan. Just to quickly touch on budgets, as you're probably aware, the department provided an additional £6.7 million in the October monitoring round to the Housing Executive. Some of that was specifically for community prevention support initiatives in the homelessness space. Some of it was for your general regional services budget, although that includes the staff who run those sorts of things. And there's a lot of pressure on some of those services. Looking forward, we have been told our budget for next year, but we're still going through a process of working out where that lands. It won't be towards maybe the early summer until we do that. But the Minister did announce in the Assembly that his intention that from 25-26 onwards, the Housing Executive will have part of its budget specifically allocated for homeless prevention activity. And in my view, this has the potential to be highly transformative in this space. So the ambition of the Department and our Minister is to prioritise prevention and to work with the Housing Executive in the sector to ensure that homelessness is rare, brief and non-recurrent. Now, thankfully, housing is now a standalone commitment in the draft programme for government for the very first time, and that includes a commitment to embed permanent assistance chains to prevent homelessness among young people. And then, while the department welcomes the Housing Executive's specific work on youth homelessness, which we're very delighted to see that there's specific actions that you're taking forward in that. And I have to acknowledge that this is the start of a journey. And I was there for the launch of Youth Homelessness Action Plan, and that was very much, the sector very much welcomed it, and said we wanted to build on this and see how we could go. And I think things are falling into place to do that. Jennifer, if I can hand over to you.
Chair, would it be helpful if I outlined some of the work that we're doing and maybe that could form some of the questions? Would that be helpful? Thank you.
Certainly.
David has touched on the recently launched in November, the Homelessness Action Plan, and we've chosen 18 actions, not lost on you that the lived experience that the Chair illustrated of the young man spending his 18th birthday in hostel is very much what we have experienced as well. So the 18 actions is reflecting the impact of the youth homelessness when you turn 18. Just important to point.
So the Homelessness Action Plan, is there a stream within that particularly related to youth, or are youth just included as part of it?
That's a really important question, because I should have clarified, it's a youth homelessness action plan. So this is specifically for the cohort that we're speaking about. And just to be clear who the cohort we're speaking about in the youth homelessness action plan, you'll know that we've also done the domestic abuse action plan. But this is specifically for those young people experiencing homelessness, because of what has touched our hearts is just the throughput of young, vulnerable people coming through the homelessness sector and often ending up in very difficult circumstances through that process. So we as an organisation set out to try and address that, and we've appointed a lead who is Evelyn Collins, who's sitting behind me, and believe me, the commitment from the housing executive and the commitment from Evelyn personally to try and make a difference on this. So the groups that we target in the Youth Homelessness Action Plan is young people who've been part of the care system, which is obviously critically important because of the vulnerabilities and them not having that family network to be able to fall back on for support. Young people aged 16 and 17 who are not known to social services, and young people aged 18 to 25 who present to us as homeless. So we have, give you an idea of scale, the individuals in these household groups, this youth homelessness group, is around 15% of the overall homelessness presentations, and around 12% of those who are given what we call full duty applicant status. Maybe just to give you an idea of some of the reasons young people present to us as homeless, you'll be very familiar with all of these. Breakdown of relationship or sharing arrangements, separated or unaccompanied minors that come through the asylum process, landlords wishing to sell or re-let their property and therefore the young person loses their tenancy, a young person leaving care, and evictions from private or social housing. So the 18 actions is very much formed by and will be led through the organisations that we have partnered with in this. So the views of people who have the lived experience of homelessness, those young people, is central to what we're going to deliver, and it's in partnership with those groups and with those young people. So that the voice of the young person is central to where we're going with this action plan. We launched it last November and we've already undertaken a number of actions. So we've introduced a dedicated housing officer to every one of our area offices across Northern Ireland, and they're taking a lead. They're the link person for that young person who's presenting as homeless or is coming through the system through health and social care. We have delivered additional training for those frontline staff, and we've worked closely with the Children's Law Centre, who've helped us design that training so that we are person-centric to the young person's needs. And we have developed extremely close working relationships, particularly with health and social care, in identifying and addressing those needs. So we particularly welcomed, and the executive have to be warmly applauded for introducing the PFG commitment to looking after young people leaving care. And as part of that process, the Housing Executive have established what we're calling new foundations. You'll maybe be aware of some of the work that we've been doing over the past year with the Royal Foundation in terms of tackling homelessness. And in the Housing Executive and in Northern Ireland, the Housing Executive have committed to young people leaving care as being a priority group within that. And we have established a new programme called New Foundations, which will help the executive deliver the PFG commitment to assisting people leaving care, young people leaving care. That's a really exciting programme and one that we are driving forward, and it's about making that transition from care into independent living as smooth as possible and providing them with the support, not just accommodation, which is critically important, but also the support around that. And we're working with a range of partners in that particular programme, as well as the broader homelessness action. So finally, just supporting services. We are very lucky in Northern Ireland that we have supporting people funding, and just within that we have a specific funding, 6.4 million, of which is going to accommodation based services and floating support based services for young people. We have almost 900 young people being supported through that programme. The housing executive is a landlord. We have a big commitment to sustaining tenancies, because what we find is when a young person is given a tenancy, unless they have that wraparound support, often the tenancy fails and they're back into the cycle of homelessness. So sustaining tenancies is the landlord funding, putting programmes in to support those young people and other people who are vulnerable to sustain their tenancy. As David mentioned, a critically important service, and it's only in Belfast. It's being coordinated and run by Belfast City Council with the partnership and support of ourselves and a number of other sectors, and that's Complex Lives. And that's working with over 100 very vulnerable people who are at risk of rough sleeping, have complex issues that need that full support. And as David sadly said, a number of those people have come through the care experience and have reached that point. So that's a really important project. Peer support and working with young people is critical for the voice of the young person to be present. So we fund the Youth Forum, for example, over about £100,000 a year for that peer support work, and also for their involvement in the Housing Community Network and our residents associations, getting the young people's voice in the business of the housing executive. And then finally, the Housing First for Youth, which is a specialist housing provision for young people leaving care in particular. And that is where we have an accommodation-based service, and we work with health and social care in that transition. And that's delivered through Simon Community, do the most amazing work with young people. And we find the accommodation and wrap the support around them, housing first, but housing first for youth. And that's funded as well. So just a wee flavour of some of the things.
Thank you. And I absolutely get the feeling that today's session will only touch on the flavour. There's so much going on there, and so much of good work and so much further work that's needed. Let me just check the figure in relation to, I'm not sure if you have this figure, but what percentage of all homelessness did you say are young people? And I'm talking from age 26 now, just...
We categorise it up to the age of 25. So for us, it's 15% of the presenters as homeless are young people. And just to give you an idea of scale, the number of presenters in that cohort of up to 25. So we've single female, single male, 16 to 17, and then 18 to 25. So that totality is 1,197 is the number of presenters, and 636 found to be full duty applicant status. So that's 15% of the overall number of presenters and 12% of the overall number of those accepted as FDA.
Chair, that's in the information we sent through to the committee.
There's a full briefing.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking that is some of the figures I have seen in terms of my own kind of preparation would indicate a much higher percentage. So I'm not sure, but I'll not get into the detail of that today. I'll take a look at that and come back and see. But
maybe, Chair, if I answer on that, the single household proportion of the waiting list is around 50%. Okay, but what we're talking about is youth homelessness. So it's the young people up to the age of 25 are a proportion of that. Okay, so they're that 12%. So in other words, over 25 single people make up the difference of that waiting
Chair,
list.
obviously doesn't include households that have children in them. The household is in there.
That might bring in the wider figure. Okay, I'll come back to that. I'm going to be really brief because there's quite a few members. I'm going to go to members to try to get through the questions from members as quickly as possible. But And what age do you take for the young people leaving care in terms of their housing situation? What age do you provide that care up to?
Richard, can I bring you in on that? Because we have the 16 to 17 age group provision, and obviously we have full responsibility from the age of 18 onwards. So we do both that side, but in terms of the detail, Richard?
Yeah, so ourselves and the Health and Social Care Trust would work very closely in meeting, and that's guided by regional good practice in meeting the accommodation needs and children of young people. If a 16, 17-year-old was to present to us as homeless, we would sort of consider the specifics of that individual case and engage with the Trust as to who meets that duty. In the briefing pack you can see the number of presentations and acceptances for 16, 17-year-olds are very low. But in terms of some of the nuances in policy, we can maybe get back with a further written response in that. As part of the Youth Homelessness Action Plan, there is a commitment to review that guidance just to make sure it is absolutely effective. So work has already commenced on reviewing that guidance as part of the Youth Homelessness Action Plan.
Okay, and I would be keen to see that. Noel, thank you for committing to send that through. I'm actually more concerned maybe on the other end of, so there's a greater recognition now of the need to support young people beyond the age of 18 and the cliff edge at 18. And by and large, in a lot of other pieces of work around autism and different work that's been done here, that age has moved to 25. So I'm wondering, do you see a young person, particularly the care, just in relation to, but it should be all young people, is there a cliff edge at 18, or does your support recognise them as youth homeless and needing that support beyond 18?
Our support will continue until such times as they've been allocated a social rented property for those who are full duty applicants. For those who are not full duty applicants, we will work with a range of statutory and voluntary partners to provide support and assistance. And as I say, whenever they are accepted as full duty applicants, we will provide support, temporary accommodation, other services until such times as they've been allocated the tenancy. And then whenever they've been allocated the tenancy, it goes to Jennifer's point around tenancy sustainment. Our patch managers will work very closely to make sure that that tenancy is a lifetime tenancy. And again, that involves pulling on support from a range of external agencies across the statutory and voluntary sectors.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Listen, I'm going to go to our Deputy Chair first, and then I'm going to come into Brian, Melissa, Sian, Morris and Kelly.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again for your presentation. Obviously, really, really important issue, and I'm glad we were able to shine a light on it. I just want to ask how your homelessness strategy and the youth homelessness strategy fits in with the anti-poverty strategy within the department. I know one of the elements of the anti-poverty strategy is about prevention. One of the elements in this strategy is about prevention as well. So how do they tie in together, and basically what can we do to try and prevent youth homelessness?
Work the anti-poverty strategy, you understand, is still going on in the department, and I'm not sure that the Housing Executive has been asked for.
No.
I've seen that, yeah. But yes, I mean, you're entirely right. What I know of the anti-poverty strategy, because I work in a different bit of the department, is that it's focusing on the things that lead people into poverty, and housing's a part of that, and emphasising the ongoing work within housing more generally around affordability and quality and things like that in the housing supply strategy. But also that brings in the need to do particular things for particular groups of people, treat people differently, and try and help them navigate through these complex systems that we have, which is very much where the youth homelessness strategy comes in. So that would be in support of that.
And maybe just the new foundations work, which obviously is young people leaving care. That is about how you can develop the person to be able to gain employment, education, skills, as well as homelessness. So the new foundations project is so important because it is about developing the person as a whole to be able to allow them to afford housing, to be able to work, and to be able to be supported through the whole range of mental health and services that they require as well. So New Foundations, which is very much focused on, is specifically focused on young people leaving care, has very much that development side, which is to address and help people get out of poverty and stay out of poverty. So that is interlinked. And homelessness, it'll not be lost. The reasons for homelessness that I was explaining to you, loss of rented accommodation can sometimes be and often be an affordability issue. And that's where that whole service around the Department for Communities in terms of ensuring that we get the appropriate housing benefit levels there. The financial inclusion officers, one of our critically sort of transformative services that we've introduced in homelessness is our financial inclusion officers, and that's about, you know, making sure that people are getting access to all the benefits that they are entitled to and giving them that full sort of robust financial advice to be able to manage as well. So homelessness does not ignore the impact that poverty has, direct impact that it can have on homelessness, but also the work that we do is about trying to support people to be able to address that element of it. Richard, anything I've missed there?
Yeah, I think just on a sort of local operational level, we have a number of local area groups aligned to each council area across Northern Ireland, and we work closely as part of those to establish local partnerships. As part of that, there will be engagement with money advice services, citizens advice, that sort of thing. So it's making sure that the overall objectives of the strategy are delivered at a local level, and as part of that, we will sort of, as I say, work very closely to meet local needs, and a lot of that is based on collaboration that includes factors like poverty.
That's an excellent point, Richard, and I suppose even as the Chair touched upon earlier in the meeting about the different kind of aspects that rural areas can face as opposed to urban ones. And Jennifer, just following on from your new Foundations project with information on that, can you maybe explain the level of engagement you've had with other departments within the executive, so the likes of Department for Education, Department for Economy, and maybe enabling people to become more economically active? And Department of Health as well. This is obviously a cross-cutting issue, so maybe you could elaborate on the engagement you've had with other departments.
That is a wonderful question, because you've named exactly the organisations that we're dealing with. I mean, just last week I was at the programme board for in health for the new RAISE programme, and how we can have homelessness as a key element of that as well, in terms of helping young people to develop the knowledge and skills to prevent homelessness at the outset, but also how we can get in there with those very vulnerable people. It's not about raising educational standards, but also how you can develop the life skills as well. So we are absolutely, they are intrinsic. We have a strategic action plan, and we are working in full collaboration. It's one of the, I mean, I'm a very long time in housing, and it's one of the organisation or one of the programmes that we've delivered that has that full integration and the commitment from health, from social care, from education, from the economy. And Evelyn, and if any of you have the pleasure of meeting Evelyn, you'll know that she is quite she will ferret away to make sure that she gets through all those things, and employment is one of the key things. And we've had some really exciting conversations in recent months about how we can help develop employment opportunities as well. So if I could give you assurance, it's probably the best programme I've seen in terms of cross-departmental commitment as well as working.
Really good to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nicola. So, Brian, go ahead.
Chair, thank you. Can just check point of information. Jennifer, you said earlier about a dedicated housing officer in every office. Is that for youth or for... What's that dedicated officer
that
for?
Is, so you'll know that we have dedicated housing advisors who are there specifically for homeless applicants, and to it's a one-to-one relationship where anyone who presents as homeless has a dedicated housing advisor, and we work through the process with them until we get ultimate housing. But within that team, we have a dedicated youth homelessness officer as well, and they've been trained in how to work and guide young people, so specifically for young people, Brian.
Okay, no, very good. And I think you've already offered to send on the Youth Homelessness Action Plan. Is that right?
A link was provided in the...
we have a link, but we get a PDF. Usually the links don't work.
Okay, well, so let us get
that's my experience.
Check that.
Right. If we could get that as well, then
100%. We'll get that too.
My experience in this whole issue is when trying to help work with a community to develop a new housing development, people are reluctant to see flats put into them, or apartments, if you like. and they'll say, oh, there'll be young people and there'll be antisocial behaviour. And I find myself arguing, well, look, if we can have something, there's a big demand for 1-bedroom accommodation or 2-bedroom for those that are smaller households. And I find there's often a pushback from communities, and there are schemes that are just for people over 55, and where there's some support provided. So, and you've mentioned about through supporting people, the work that likes of Simon Community does with extra support, and I forget the name of the project we visited in Londonderry at the Methodist Church on our trip there.
First housing?
Certainly First Housing have a...
Yeah.
Anyway, the one, it was in the Methodist Church. Aye. But anyway, it was just that there was a special support provided there.
House in the Wells?
I'll check it after.
Alcorn Square.
The question I wanted to ask is recognising young people as needing extra support. I know your ideal tenants are people who will go in, look after themselves, not cause any bother to people, and not trouble you as much. But quite often young people do need that extra support, and even once they get a tenancy, is there extra support that's provided, both for their benefit, but also if there's tensions with other people living nearby who have a stereotype view of young single people living in accommodation?
That very much reflects our experiences on the ground, in that sometimes there can be conflict there because of perceived behaviours or noise, nuisance or whatever. And that's why a landlord should always have an intensive housing management provision. So we very strongly recognise in the social housing sector that you have to have a blended provision of housing. A large number of a single type of accommodation, so say a block of 80 or 90 that is purely for single people, and the housing management issues that may arise, very often does not arise, but that may arise, that requires intensive management. And of course the big thing that we do in terms of forward planning for any of the new build is providing a support for a housing mix that is where you get that mix of family accommodation, pensioner accommodation and accommodation for singles. That's how communities thrive, is with that mix of age groups, and people become a community. So the housing mix is important. The housing management in terms of landlords' responsibility to deal with issues, and even more importantly, how you provide that support to the individuals who may be experiencing issues through our sustaining tenancies programme, through our supporting people programme, and the floating support. The numbers I was giving you there of the floating support that we give, for example, 681 of those units are young people who have tenancies, and it is about that support that you do with that peer encouragement and support as well. So it's that mix.
Yeah. It's not, you can't do the thing you just give someone a key and leave them to it.
Yes.
You can't do that
That's
in
what
very many
landlords
cases,
do.
but especially with young people.
Yeah.
And especially young people who quite often don't have a family network or anything like that to support them. They absolutely need a lot of support, and there are really good schemes like the Simon Community Scheme and things like that, which are quite intensive. And then as well as that, I mean, it's social housing. I mean, we subsidise social housing for a reason. It's because quite often
Housing
people in it
management.
need support and housing management and things like that.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Melissa, please.
Patrick Overleg, you're all very welcome. And I'll put all mine into one heap here, just in the sense. The first question that I was interested in was in relation to the £7 million we say that's gone to the executive. What strategies have they adopted as a result of that? Secondly, and again going back to the dedicated officers and so on, because I've been dealing with some of them recently. It's a very, very welcome development in every respect. But at the same time, that whenever it comes to dealing with homelessness, in particular for young people, that we find that there's very, very little opportunities for them in terms of availability of accommodation. And I think then in particular too, in those that are coming from care, that where they already probably maybe even have a priority, but at the same time we're confronted with this lack of supply effectively, and are being referred to areas well outside of their own natural habitat, in a sense, even whether it's in terms of, we'll say, family support, jobs or education or the likes of it, so that within that 7 million and so on that has gone to the executive now at the present time, are there specific strategies that they're adopting there to address that? Secondly, just the other point being then too, to what extent are they involved in then the other housing associations and prioritising these same young people? Or is it just seen to be the responsibility, i.e. of the executive being like the lead partner in a sense?
Okay. So the second one is about the dedicated officers and availability of accommodation. You can talk a wee bit about that. But I mean, the additional money the Minister made available in October monitoring was to secure the prevention programmes, the community prevention programmes that the Housing Executive were doing. So those are, and you might have to help me out here, things like the Welcome Centre and First House, or the DePaul Drop-In and First Housing up in Derry, London Derry. Some of the youth mentoring work with housing rights to support people coming out of prison. Complex Lives in Belfast, and a few other
First for Youth.
Housing First for Youth and things like that. I think with some of these, the Minister's next part of his announcement that there would be a prevention budget ring fenced going forward was because over the last few years, because of the wider pressures in the homelessness budget, it's been very difficult to say, we will at the start of the year absolutely fund that. So quite often the funding's been sort of 3 months at a time, and 3 months at a time as we know that we can do it. We would like to fund more, establish some of those programmes, and then secure their funding over the longer term. But that's all work to be done as we start to do the future budgets. The dedicated housing officer supply.
Yeah, so in terms of that particular point, whenever we send the PDF of the Youth Homelessness Action Plan, Action 13 contains a specific commitment to consider the development of youth-specific allocation. So there's a lot of work to be done to get to a point where that would be the case, but there is a commitment in there to consider that. And I suppose that the commitment was a reflection of us listening to those within the youth homelessness sector. So you can't really say much more than that at this stage, beyond there is a commitment. Work will sort of be underway, and at a point in time in the future we'll be able to sort of outline how we take that forward, but it's included in the action plan, and you can see Action 13 in there.
So there's also some other specific bits of work. So we talked about the young people leaving care. That is a housing led piece of work. It's about getting houses and accommodation for young people when they're leaving care, rather than just joining the list with everybody else. So there's quite a lot to be worked through. It's quite exciting. As an approach has been taken elsewhere, and it has worked in other places. Things like, it's a Housing First for Youth model as well, and we also talked. It also includes the wraparound. Back to the point that Brian's been talking about. So there's a much longer version of the answer that involves how the Housing Executive assesses housing need generally and does the programme and things like that. But I think that might have been you might have got that last week. So are you happy not to do that again?
And just to be clear, the housing associations, there's a single housing selection scheme and a single waiting list. So all housing providers allocate from that single waiting list. The other key element is that we direct our new build programme into those areas of extremely high need. So it's trying to get that focused in on those areas where that massive housing demand is, and therefore there are shortages and people are having to wait much longer for social housing tenancy. So the combination of fairness and equality in terms of a single selection scheme, and all social housing providers must allocate from that, and then directing the housing supply into areas where the greatest need is.
Well, that's really what the question was sort of implying as well too. I understand entirely about the single waiting list. I've been familiar with that for a long number of years. But to what extent are they totally integrated and matching, say, with your objectives in terms of meeting the needs of the young homeless people?
Well, housing associations have been amazing partners with us, not least in the homelessness sector in terms of their ownership and management of some of the services in partnership with the likes of Simon. I don't want to keep mentioning one particular organisation because our voluntary and community sector do amazing work. But we have around 1,000 hostel places, some of which are managed and owned by housing associations, and their commitment to sustaining that and making sure they're high quality. I think it's important to point out that housing associations and housing executive work very closely together. We are all social housing providers. The standard of housing association property is very, very high, and the new bill that is coming through, the housing executive help them direct into areas where the housing is needed, and that single selection scheme is critical to make sure that we are addressing the housing need at its greatest point of need.
Okay, listen, thank you, Marisa. So I'm moving then, we're going to online to Shan, please. Lanare, Shan Liddahall.
Thank you very much, Chair. Jennifer, I think you'll know how delighted I am to see this come through. I think one of my first letters to you was about the Youth Homelessness Action Plan. So it's really great to see it in fruition. The couple of questions that I have are around that supporting young people to sustain a tenancy. What money at the minute is set aside for that? And I'm really delighted that you've mentioned it, because I think it's all well and good to give a young person a property, but to actually support them to sustain it is another thing. And the second thing is about complex lives. As you'll know, there are some areas of Northern Ireland where the dual diagnosis, addiction, mental health are just a really, really big problem. And I see that most in Ballymena, and I'm wondering, have there been any conversations with other councils to roll complex lives and that scheme and that model of work in any other council area in Northern Ireland?
Thank you, Sean. The sustaining tenancies is around 3 million that the housing executive as a landlord fund directly. And within that, of course, the important component of sustaining tenancies is the frontline service that the housing executive provides in its estates through its patch managers. So it's that direct contact and engagement with new tenants. So there's a whole piece of work that is done when a person is allocated a property, and that wraparound support that is done and the frequent we visit them within those early first 6 months of the tenancy as well, rather than waiting to identify issues. So sustaining tenancies is a very healthy budget. I'm very happy to provide the committee with an outline of the programme, what it is that we support, because we do very much target areas where perhaps there's been a history of issues. One of the first ones we did was in Newcastle, and it was an estate that was experiencing significant antisocial behaviour issues, and we went in there as an organisation ourselves to provide that additional support. Supporting people also, and as I was explaining, it's 6.4 million that Supporting People fund directly to youth-based services, and that's 22 accommodation-based services across 231 units and 681 floating support services to individuals young people who have tenancies already. So that Supporting People funding is a critically important support through that helps sustain tenancies, as well as what the landlord of the housing executive does. And Complex Lives was piloted in Belfast. It has been, I don't think anyone who has seen it in practice could think anything other than it's a fantastic process. And we have had a couple of councils asking about it and asking for presentations on it, so that we can come, and our hope and ambition would be very much that other councils step into that space as well, and we work collaboratively on spreading it out across all of Northern Ireland.
Of course, Complex Life, it's not a housing executive programme, it's led by the council. The benefits from it flow in very large part to health and justice as well. There's a really important housing part of it, because until you have people in a house and stable and supported in their tenancy, those things, you don't get those health benefits, you don't get those reduced calls in the Department of Justice. And this cohort make really heavy use of accident emergency and things like that. So it's a really important three-way partnership.
And health are key partners in it as well.
And it's the central role of Belfast under its police shaping powers to pull it all together has been the thing that has really impressed me in it. The housing executive is open to doing other things, but in order to roll it out, Shan, I suppose the answer is it's not up to the housing executive. This sort of group has to get together, and this mental has to be created in other places as well. And Jennifer's absolutely right. I mean, you won't be found wanting.
Yeah.
And we won't be found wanting supporting it, but it does take everything to come together. And on Jill,
I presume, David, that's where the department comes in and pulling that all together. That's your role.
Well, it's done by Belfast. It's Belfast Council. I think to give credit where credit's due, and they have that place shaping responsibility. They looked at their community planning powers and they said, well, what do we want to do? And it is very much beyond the Department for Communities, but very much other departments and other agencies have to be brought in as well.
The council led that because of the experience of rough sleeping within the city, and how they could pull all the agencies together to try and address that.
Okay.
On dual diagnosis, Shannon, it is in the Interdepartmental Homeless Action Plan, the Department of Health commitment to move forward in dual diagnosis. They have committed to treating everybody, regardless of their condition, and the action on the plan is to develop those services. I can't remember exactly what it is. Develop a commissioning model, possibly.
Okay. Hey, Sean? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so moving then to Morris, who's also online. Go ahead, Morris, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. The NIHE Youth Homeless Plan is very, very welcome and very much needed. I have a few questions, Chair, I would like to ask. And I'd like to ask how the panel aim to monitor and evaluate the Homelessness Action Plan, ensuring its success. And Brian alluded to this here, but within the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, how many dedicated housing advisors exist for youth homelessness? I know it will be a large number in the city areas, but I'm worried about the rural areas. And what particular issues has your plan identified within the rural communities, which are often overlooked, and how many of the 1,197 young people presented as homeless are actually in the rural area?
Thank you, Morris. So go ahead, please, David.
Can I ask you to take the first 2 points?
The first one was around monitoring
and
homeless action plan and evaluation.
So the Youth Homelessness Action Plan is part of the overall homelessness strategy. The homelessness strategy is monitored by the Central Homelessness Forum, which includes a range of organisations across the statutory and voluntary sector. Young person specific, it includes MAX and the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. We will be reporting to the Central Homelessness Forum on that. Additionally, we have an internal steering group which monitors delivery of that. On an annual basis, we will be providing a written update as part of our annual progress report, which is published annually and shared again with all of our stakeholders. And additionally, we have committed to engaging with the sector on a regular basis. In the action plan, it says every 6 months there's going to be engagement, much more on that. Evelyn's sort of leading on engagement on a sort of weekly and monthly basis, but again, we are fully happy to be accountable and transparent in what we're doing on that. So there's the formal mechanisms such as the Central Homelessness Forum, the annual progress report, the internal steering group, and then there's those informal mechanisms such as regular sort of meetings with key partners within the sector. In terms of the number of housing advisors, I don't have that specific figure with me, but we'll happily to follow that up in writing.
Are they in every office?
Well, put it this way,
Yes.
we have 13 area offices, so there is one in every area office, and in Belfast, because we have 4 offices, in Belfast doing homelessness, I would suggest there's possibly 4 there. But
There's coverage of everywhere, including rural areas.
Absolutely, and from in every part, including all our rural areas. So every office, every one of our 13 offices across Northern Ireland has a dedicated officer, and probably more in Belfast. So we'll confirm.
And given the scale of the continuing problem, despite all of the work that we're talking about here, are there any plans to increase that? Would that be seen as something that could provide significant additional benefit if we had more?
I wholeheartedly agree what you do with Test and Learn. So we've started this. We've come out in November with our Youth Homelessness Action Plan. This is a dedicated resource that we've put in, and we will increase that resource as and when required if the numbers are supporting that. So that will definitely not be found wanting.
Morris, then the specific rural element then of Morris's question around what was being done within the plan for specifically rural.
In terms of the local area groups?
So we have a number of local area groups. I've mentioned them earlier, so I'm not going to labour the point about what they do in terms of bringing the statutory and voluntary sectors together. In terms of youth homelessness specific, there's a really clear example of how they're working. For example, we've got a team down, including our local team, our strategy team, and a number of people from the sector in our Fermanagh and Omagh District Council area. They're delivering a presentation to year 11, year 12 children in one of the secondary schools in Enniskillen, and that is basically highlighting to young people, A, what homelessness is, because there's maybe a perception from young people that it's just rough sleeping. So we're highlighting that it can go above and beyond rough sleeping, but additionally it's letting them know as they sort of transition into adulthood what the services are available within the Fermanagh and Omagh area. And again, that's something we've been working closely with the schools in Fermanagh. There's plans for another few of those presentations, and we are happy to engage with our other local area groups to see how we can roll that out. So that for me is one simple but very effective measure. Additionally, those local area groups include representatives from the children and young people sector. So for example, Action for Children, and again the role of them is to make sure that we are accountable both in terms of the Youth Homelessness Action Strand and the homelessness strategy, both in urban and rural areas. So if they identify a particular issue in an area, we make sure that it's factored into the development of our annual action plan. So in terms of the strategy and the Youth Homelessness Action Plan, they are fluid documents. So although they cover up until March 2027, there's a commitment to review those on an annual basis. And again, in terms of rural homelessness, the local area groups play a key role in highlighting the challenges and making sure that we as an organisation and a sector as a whole respond for that.
But I think in conclusion, Maurice, it's important to point out the Housing Executive delivers its services across all of Northern Ireland, and we have offices in every part of Northern Ireland, and the rural element is a key component of all the work that we do. You know, there are no gaps in Housing Executive services in terms of that advice and assistance that we give under the Homelessness Youth Action Plan.
Okay, thank you.
Beg your indulgence, please.
Very briefly, please, Morris.
Several funding amounts realised there, but are you sure that the long-term funding commitments or ring-fence funding are available to make sure the plan's sustainable? And what impact do you think the Northern Ireland-wide shortage of housing will have on your plan? I'm really wanting to know if the funds that you have mentioned are long-term and will make the plan sustainable over the long-term future.
Thank you, Morris. And briefly as possible, David.
I suppose the answer, and you've probably heard this in many different policy areas, is because we use one-year budgets and the cycle of those. The answer to that is that they're not. I mean, every year we go into this and there is a discussion about a budget. Some years that's more difficult than others. It's useful to have a minister because he can prioritise things, and as I said, he said he's going to prioritise homelessness prevention. But what we really need is longer term budgets. I mean, this year I said we're not going to know what we're going to know what our budget is at the start of the summer. Maybe by the time we go through the two cycles of public consultation, but you know, in other years we've been deep into the autumn before we've been able to confirm a budget for the Housing Executive, and then there was one year when we tried to do homeless prevention for 6 months. You can't start a scheme for 6 months, taking on staff and trying to do something, especially if you're trying to mentor somebody and work with them for a protracted period of time. It doesn't work. You also mentioned the general broader housing supply. I mean, the most important thing, if you step back and look at the whole system systematically, is that housing is generally affordable for most people. So in the private rented sector, the owner-occupied sector and things like that, the more generally affordable housing is, the less structural homelessness you're going to get, the less households which are going to struggle, and then they're going to struggle in their children and possibly going to have experienced eviction or moving around, or children who have been in the homelessness system because of their parents are much more likely to be in the homelessness system themselves. There's a sort of intergenerational bit to it. So the more affordable the housing system we have, the more stable and strong the housing system we have over the longer term, that would only help benefit the longer term amount of youth homelessness that you get.
Okay, thank you. I'll have to move on, Morris. Thank you. Kelly, go ahead, please. You're the last.
Chair's going to have a heart attack because I'm going to be very quick. Asked a couple of questions very directly. So, what's happening with Action 5 of the Youth Homelessness Action Plan about the training? How are you getting on with that? My next one is, in the document, the Youth Homelessness Action Plan, it says that care leavers are communicated with 3 months out from their 16th birthday. Does that mean then that no care leaver is homeless or presents as homeless because they're already getting that work established before that would happen? And if not, why does that happen? And my other question, more sort of touched on it there, about the supply of 1 and 2 bedroom accommodation. Is the housing executive able to proactively offer out to housing associations, there's a piece of land, but we only want 1 and 2 bedrooms given the pressures that we have and the number of single people? Just those 3. That'll do.
Thank you,
quick.
No, very good.
That's the first one, Richard, that's for you.
Yeah, so in terms of Action 5, there's 3 strands of that. The commissioning about bespoke training, that happened prior to the sort of implementation of the youth, the specific youth advisor. So that was delivered by the Children's Law Centre. And again, from a housing executive perspective, that will, be reviewed as and when. So as new or additional people come into that role, that training will be facilitated, because from our perspective, it's been a really, really useful sort of tool in terms of making sure our staff provide the most appropriate support and assistance, and particularly in respect of our engagement with the Trust. Information training sessions for staff in relation to young people aged 16, 17 and 18 to 21 years old. Evelyn sort of leads on a range of policy initiatives, including, for example, we have team leader forums, regular team leader forums, to make sure that the strategic messages are passed down the organisation, so that's a part of that. And then joint training workshops with colleagues in the Health and Social Care Trust, Probation and Youth Justice Agency again, and that's a regular. There's a really good element of cross-departmental working with those organisations in particular. So that was a sort of year 1 action, and it's all going well as far as we're concerned.
On care leavers, yes, work to prepare care leavers for late system starts when they're 16. This is the Department for Health's policy space, and they've done an awful lot of work to try and make sure that they have a housing, some sort of stable, secure housing afterwards, and whether that's staying with a foster family for after their 18th birthday or something like that. But in some cases, and it's not as often as it used to be, I mean, I've seen statistics, and it happens to a lot less young people, they do get to 18 and there is no other option. Now bear in mind, at that point, a homeless presentation, that person will become homeless, but a homeless presentation and acceptance is how you put a roof over their head. Yeah. It's how we make sure they have somewhere to sleep that night. So yes, some are still coming out into homelessness, but because a presentation and acceptance at that point is how we make sure that that person has somewhere to go that night. So, and what we're talking about doing is trying to get other options for the Department of Health. So when they're doing those plans for people leaving care, I mean, they can find, so saying with the foster family, if the foster family is ideal, getting them university accommodation if they're going away. So there's more work around these sorts of things. Yeah. But there's still a group who are coming out and going into hostels or temporary accommodation and things like that. Sometimes it's supported, sometimes it's not. It's not always supported. But the idea is so that they don't go into that they do have their own housing option with support.
And it would be Health would have those figures then?
So yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I have seen them, but I'm always cautious about trying to remember them in a committee.
Yeah,
where it's recorded.
I appreciate it.
On the last one, on 1 and 2 bedroom accommodation, and the housing executive does tell the housing associations what the mix of housing
and the need.
And
I'm actually talking about this the other way, where the housing executive says there's a bit of land, but we only want this. So who's bidding for it?
I mean, when you look at the programme, it's very heavily 1 and 2 bedroom.
I know, but every developer doesn't want to build a 1 and 2 bedroom. Well, 2 bedroom, yes, maybe not 1.
You had Elma and Grania last week to talk about place shaping, and this is the space where they get into this discussion. And it goes Brian as well. I mean, I've seen things locally to me as well, where the communities go, 1 and 2 bedrooms then, eh? Are they going to be old persons? No. And then there's a discussion about it. But when you actually look at the programme, it is overwhelmingly 1 and 2 bedroom. So yes, it's
by and large the housing associations are coming forward for family homes and developments.
They want a good mix, and planners want a good mix, and communities want a mix as well.
Developers don't.
But 50% of the people with homeless status are single. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, listen, again, like many of the other things in communities, a work in progress, and we've done a very quick, given the complexity of the landscape, a very quick rush across it. I have to say I am concerned around the idea of, raised by the Deputy Chair, around that lack of coordination between the youth homelessness and the anti-poverty strategy, because clearly there's a relationship between where if you fall into poverty, and we've been told prevention is a key part of that strategy, we haven't seen it yet, and we're looking forward to it soon, I hope. But if you fall into poverty, you're more likely to become homeless, and also if you fall into homelessness, you're more likely to fall into poverty. So there's a cycle there. So
I don't want you to take away the idea that there's no coordination between it. I think what's happened is, as you know, that there was work done previously on the strategy, and another one is being taken forward, and you haven't seen it either. I don't think that's been brought to the Housing Executive, but I can assure you that there is nothing. There's nothing in that doesn't say that prevention is important, and it mentions housing, and housing is very strong. And I'm aware within the department of some of the discussions about how the anti-poverty strategy is developing, and I'm very, very aware of the work the Housing Executive's done, and how absolutely everything the Housing Executive's doing broadly in housing, everything the department's doing broadly in housing, and everything you're doing in your homeless strategy absolutely aligns to it. It's all the same thing. It's about prevention and supporting families to make sure that they intergenerationally in the longer term the supports are put around them to mean that the key causation factors of poverty don't affect families, and how we can change that. And that is a big long-term piece of work, but giving a family a house that's secure, that is their house, is one of the most fundamental foundations of moving out of poverty, and the support that you have to stay in that, and everything that we've talked about today. So please don't take that away. It's just, I don't think Jennifer has seen the latest version of it. It's a different thing.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much. This is something we will return to, I guess, over and over again. A lot of work on there. I'd love to hear a lot more about a lot of the detail of it, but we'll talk about that. We'll pick up on some actions maybe out of the after the session. But thank you for attendance, and good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck with your very important work in this respect. Thank you very much.
Evelyn will charge forward, Chair, be assured.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Okay, members. So. Any follow-up actions? There has been a number of things committed that the officials have committed to sending. That's very welcome, and we'll look forward to receiving those. Is there anything else members want to pick up on?
Yeah, I'd be quite keen to find out from our councils exactly what they have plans or considering in place for housing. Can we ask them? I do want a copy of their full community development plan, and there's only a few of them have LDPs. So could we ask them to specifically, each council, to provide us specifically with their community plans with regards to housing?
The Chair, as well, just
yes, go ahead,
for complex lives.
Yeah,
that was very interesting there now, and that's actually happened in Belfast, and I think it might be something that's probably more specific to the more urbanised type areas and so on, say such as Derry or even Newry or cities of that capacity, more so than maybe like rural communities and the likes of it. But at the same time, I wonder to what extent has that been shared? And if it's actually making other councils not aware of it, maybe as a project that seems to be working successfully.
Maybe when we're writing out, maybe we take the opportunity to ask the councils around, are they aware of complex lives, and is there any learning been shared? That occurred to me as well, didn't get a chance to get back to it.
Yeah.
And also ask the department, are they kind of ensuring that learning from complex life or improvement is being shared across.
Shared, yeah.
Maybe right to both in that. I think that's invaluable because it is clearly a model that is bringing some benefit. And we should. Brian, have you something?
Well, just to say the project we visited was Clooney Hall.
Clooney Hall.
Getting the name right.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was Crawford Square, not Abercorn Square. Crawford Square is the place that other place is located.
That's local knowledge coming in. So, Claire, you can head with the actions?
Yes, I have. So it's to all councils, asking them specifically for the housing detail from their community plans, and also whether or not there's consideration to use of the place shaping powers in relation to rollout of the complex lives model. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you, members. So, members, moving on then to item 13, forward work programme. Copy is provided for you there, page 274. Do members have any comments, or are they content to note the forward work programme? And just to say, I will be mentioning next week's event here in relation to the date, time, place, the arts event. I'll be mentioning that in the next item. But outside of that, do members have any comments or that they wish to? Brian?
Just the TEO committee, we received the National Museum's draft corporate strategy. So I don't know if that come to us for this committee, because I raised that surely that's under communities. but they said there's some elements of it, whatever are good relations or related to the Troubles and so on.
I think that was in last week's communications document.
Was it?
I think it was, yeah. There was a corporate plan there from them.
2025.
Yeah, it was in last week's
corporate plan, yeah.
Okay, no, I hadn't seen it in our papers. That's fine. It
was
had
last
came out.
week.
I'll double check and get it sent through.
Right, and just I know it was through another MLA was saying to me that the Folk Museum was keen for us to come out to visit, but I know we have various demands, but I don't think we've done a session on NMNI, so.
We haven't yet, no.
No, we haven't done, and that is something we're maybe keen to. The Folk and Transport Museum was mentioned as a.
I think they're on the list at the bottom of the plan, but I'll double check that.
And what I would suggest is maybe we look at doing one of our outreach sessions, maybe, and combine that with possibly that could be something we look at. I think we've discussed
the committee
that
the committee training or
something like,
teamwork.
Maybe
Okay.
if we're doing a session like that, maybe we could look at if we are going to be stepping out. Maybe we step out into one of our
Well, the
lovely
Ulster
museums.
Museum or the National Museums out at the Folk Museum has the Manor House, so yeah.
Okay.
Follow that one up.
Yep, we'll come back to that. Item 14, members, any other business today? You've covered that. And then item 15, our last item is date, time, and location next meeting. So our next meeting is the Arts Sector event at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 13th of February 2025 in the Long Gallery here in Parliament Buildings. Papers will be circulated Monday as usual. This is a really important opportunity for the committee to hear directly from the sector. All members will have a role in that engagement, and that will be set out for us, and the engagement will end at 1 o'clock. I just want to say, in addition, I want to really thank the committee staff around the work, a massive amount of work. This is a really important sector. We've brought this session forward because we are concerned and conscious that within a very complex department, that sector sometimes can be overlooked or under-considered. This is our attempt to try to address that. My understanding is invites and feedback taken from over 130 organisations. So I really want to thank the staff for pulling this together, and I really want to encourage members to engage with it in that respect. It's a very important opportunity. I know the sectors out there are looking forward to it. I'm hearing sectors mention it now at this stage. So it's something that I really hope they get a lot of value out of, and we get a lot of value out of as well. Brian?
So what will the format? Will we be distributed around a number of tables then with a number of groups?
You'll be equally and well distributed.
After each question, so it's a World Cafe with members moving and tables set,
Okay.
and you'll have a set of questions and prompts. We'll have people capturing that in the room from the assembly. We've also, with help from engagement teams, secured a graphic artist who's going to capture that for prosperity for the committee, which I hope will, be a great experience. She'll also feedback at the very end, and I'm aware that then we're going to hand over the room and the space to the APG.
It's APG and ours. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And I want to extend that. Sian, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. No, it was just to absolutely reiterate your comment there about thank you to the staff. The feedback that I've received from the sector is that, and I quote from one person who said, "This is the first time we feel really seen." And I think that's a really, really important point. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Emer, Chris, Sean, all that have been involved in Katie in organising this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually thinking about that earlier around that session we did in the Long Gallery in relation to the sign languages bill. That was really, and I think a lot of that work was on unseen and unacknowledged on our behalf by the team here, but it's absolutely much appreciated, I have to say. If not often enough mentioned, it's certainly much appreciated, and we certainly couldn't function in the way that we do without all of that work, and there's a lot of work to it all. So, thank you for all of that, and members therefore are content with date, time, place of our next meeting, and I wish you all the very best and see you again soon. Thank you. All right.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, sound.